Welcome, sleep from history. Tonight, we are going to drift back into the surprisingly intoxicating world of the ancient Egyptians. Picture the desert night glowing with torchlight against temple walls, the air rich with the scent of incense, and clay jars brimming with thick bread beer passed around in celebration. Priests chant in rhythmic tones, while worshippers sway in the haze, blurring the line between sacred ritual and revelry until both become one dreamlike experience. But here's the reality check. You probably wouldn't last a week. Their beer wasn't the crisp, golden drink we know today, but a heavy slurry of fermented bread. Their incense wasn't a gentle perfume, but a dense smoke that left you reeling between visions and suffocation. And their festivals, they rivaled the wildest parties of any era, overwhelming body and mind in ways that would exhaust even the bravest reveler. Before we wander further into this haze of history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these sleepy journeys into the past. And please drop your location and the time where you are now in the comments. I love watching our global map of listeners grow one dreamer at a time. Now, let's drift together into ancient Egypt. Trippy, intoxicating, unforgettable. The night settles over the Nile Valley. Warm winds, carrying the scent of papyrus reeds and the faint sweetness of fermented grain. Flickering lamps glow against mud brick houses, while in the distance, temple drum summon the faithful to gather. You step into this ancient scene not as a tourist of modern times, but as someone drifting among the Egyptians themselves, where celebration, intoxication, and ritual flow together like the river. The stars above seem brighter, almost pulsing, as if the heavens themselves are preparing to join the feast. To the Egyptians, these gatherings were far more than moments of leisure. They were bridges to the divine. The feast of drunkenness, held in honor of the goddess Hathor, was an annual ritual that merged survival myth and revelry into one unforgettable night. According to legend, Hathor once raged against humanity, nearly destroying the world in a frenzy of blood. To calm her, the gods brewed vats of potent beer, dyed red to resemble blood. When she drank it, her fury softened into laughter, and mankind was spared. Each year, Egyptians remembered this by raising their own cups drinking, until they staggered and entering a state where the boundary between mortal and divine dissolved. Beer itself was no light refreshment. It was a thick porridge-like mash made from baked bread, soaked and fermented, consumed daily by peasants, priests, even children. Safer than water, heavier than food, and always tinged with intoxication. In festivals, it was mixed with dates, herbs, and honey, offering not only calories, but visions that seemed to shimmer with divine presence. Imagine standing inside a temple courtyard, the limestone walls echoing with chants. Smoke curls upward from dishes of incense, resin, frankincense, kefir, so heavy that breathing feels like swallowing clouds. Priests raise their arms as voices rise in monotone rhythm, while worshippers sway in trance. It is difficult to say whether the visions come from the gods or from the intoxicating air itself. Archaeological evidence tells us this was no invention of poets. Residues of cannabis, opium, and even nicotine have been found on mummies and burial goods, suggesting that altered states were woven into both daily life and the rituals of death. To an Egyptian priest, this was not excess. It was sacred technology, a way to soothe pain, glimpse the beyond, or lead the community into communion with the unseen. And here is the unexpected wonder. For all their obsession with order, geometry, and balance, the Egyptians embraced chaos when it came to the mind. Altered states were not feared, but invited so long as they served the gods. A sip of wine, a lungful of incense, a draught of opium, each could be a pathway to wisdom, or at least to relief in a harsh world of deserts, toothaches, and sudden death. Perhaps this was their truest genius, knowing that in order to face the relentless sun, by day one needed the refuge of dreams by night. From the haze of incense and the clamor of chants, the scene begins to fade. The sound of laughter drifts into silence. The clay cups are emptied, and the smoke thins as dawn begins to glow over the Nile. But history never rests. From the intoxicating rituals of Egypt, we will soon step into another world, one of powdered faces, plucked brows and bodies, shaped by fashion. Renaissance beauty awaits, with its own strange rituals of pain and splendor. The Nile has fallen quiet, its waters sliding smoothly beneath the moonlight. A soft wind stirs the reeds, and beyond the villages, the temple drums begin to call. This is no ordinary night. It is the night of Hathor, the golden goddess, and her feast of intoxication. The air already carries the smell of brewing bread beer, thick and sweet, mingling with the resinous smoke of incense that pours from the temple gates. People of all classes drift toward the sacred courts, farmers still streaked with the dust of the fields, noble women with necklaces of faience beads, priests in crisp white linen, even children tugging at their mothers' hands. All are welcome, for tonight is a night when order itself gives way to chaos, when laughter and drunkenness are not sins, but offerings to the divine. The story behind this strange celebration was whispered for centuries, carried on papyrus, and painted onto temple walls. Once it was said humanity offended the gods so deeply that Ra, the sun god, sent Hathor down to earth in the form of a lioness. She descended in a frenzy of bloodlust, her claws tearing through villages, her roar echoing across the sands. Humanity seemed doomed, but the gods, horrified at the destruction, devised a trick. They brewed vast vats of beer, thickened and dyed with red ochre so that it resembled blood. Hathor drank deeply, believing she was still consuming her prey. Slowly her fury softened, her eyes grew heavy, and the lioness fell into laughter and song. Mankind was saved not by swords or shields, but by intoxication. And so each year, the Egyptians remembered this miracle by surrendering themselves to joyous drunkenness. Picture the scene within the temple courtyard. Clay jugs stand in rows, filled not with the clear amber liquid you might imagine, but with something closer to porridge beer, so dense it could almost be eaten with a spoon. Priests ladle it into cups, passing them down to the eager crowd. The taste is sour, yeasty, alive with fermentation. Some wince, others gulp. The air grows thick with chatter and laughter. Drummers beat their instruments faster, flutes shriek over the noise, and women in linen gowns dance in circles, their jewelry clattering in the torchlight. This is not a quiet or dignified ritual. It is noisy, messy, and utterly human. And that is the point. To the Egyptians, joy itself was sacred laughter, a prayer and intoxication, a bridge to the goddess who once nearly ended the world. The feast of drunkenness was not confined to the elite. Pharaohs might preside over grand ceremonies in monumental temples, but villagers mirrored the ritual in their smaller shrines and homes. Everyone from the highest noble to the humblest farmer could claim their part in the night of Hathor. To stagger, to laugh too loudly, to collapse beneath the stars in a haze of beer and music, this was not shameful. It was divine participation. Some sang hymns, others shouted jokes, still others slipped into visions, swearing they glimpsed Hathor's lioness form prowling at the edge of the torchlight. Whether or not the goddess truly appeared mattered little. What mattered was that for one night, all Egyptians shared in the chaos that once saved their ancestors. And as the night deepened, the boundaries blurred further. Incense smoke thickened until torches seemed to swim in halos. The drumming no longer kept time, but rolled like thunder shaking the chest. Voices rose into something between singing and shouting. Some fell to the ground in laughter, others swayed as if hypnotized. The priests encouraged it all, for to lose oneself was to honor Hathor, to repeat the salvation of the world. By dawn, the temple floor was littered with empty jars, the worshippers sleeping in heaps, the air still heavy with smoke and sour sweet yeast. Order would return with sunrise, but for this single night, Egypt surrendered itself to chaos, trusting that within disorder lay divine protection. It is a strange paradox to modern ears that a civilization so devoted to order, balance, and geometry embraced such wildness as holy, yet the feast of drunkenness reveals something essential about the Egyptians. They understood that life was fragile, that the desert could kill that plague, and famine could strike without warning. To laugh in the face of that, to drink until the edges of reality blurred, was not merely indulgence, it was survival sanctified. The goddess who once threatened to destroy humanity became its savior through intoxication. And in honoring her, the Egyptians found a way to celebrate life, even when it trembled on the edge of death. As the sun rises over the Nile, and the worshippers slowly wake their heads, aching, their mouths dry, the world seems steady again. The lions have retreated, the goddess is appeased, and life can continue. But the story of their night does not end here. For beer was not only a festival drink, it was the very foundation of daily survival. To understand the Egyptians, one must understand their beer, their liquid bread consumed in homes, temples, and tombs alike. And so from the riotous feast of Hathor, we drift next into the quieter, but no less vital truth beer, as the staff of life in ancient Egypt. Morning drifts softly over the Nile, painting the river in sheets of gold. The great feast has ended, and the sound of laughter has faded into silence. Yet the story of Egyptian intoxication does not belong only to temples or festivals. It lives in every household, every village, every daily meal. If you want to picture life in Egypt, do not imagine only pyramids or pharaohs on gilded thrones. Imagine instead the simple act of drinking, because for the Egyptians, beer was not a luxury, it was life itself. Step into a humble home on the edge of the fields. The walls are of mud brick, cool against the heat, the roof thatched with reeds. A clay jar sits in the corner, sealed with linen. The woman of the house kneels beside it, prying it open with careful fingers. A sour, yeasty smell rises, earthy and familiar. This is their beer, but it is not the sparkling amber liquid we think of today. It is dense, thick, and cloudy, more like a porridge than a drink. The taste is tangy, the texture grainy, and in each mouthful you can feel the weight of bread and grain. The Egyptians called it liquid bread, and that name was no exaggeration. It was brewed from emmer wheat loaves, baked until half cooked, then crumbled soaked, and left to ferment. What emerged was not elegant, not refined, but sustaining. Beer was for everyone. Children sipped it from cups as casually as they might drink milk today. Laborers on temple construction sites were rationed daily portions, not only to quench thirst, but to keep strength for back-breaking work beneath the sun. Farmers drank it at the end of long days, priests in between rituals, even pharaohs at their banquets. It crossed every boundary of class and wealth. To live in Egypt was to drink beer, because beer was safer than water, more nourishing than broth, and always available when grain was at hand. In a world where the disease lurked in the river and milk spoiled too quickly, beer was the trustworthy companion. Imagine the communal moment of drinking, a jug placed in the center of a gathering, several long reeds used as straws, and a circle of friends or family leaning in together. It was not only about thirst, it was about connection. The act of drinking from the same vessel tied people together in invisible bonds. It was social glue, spiritual unity, and daily comfort all at once. One can almost hear the hum of conversations, the soft laughter, the sigh of satisfaction, as the soupy beer filled hungry stomachs. In that moment, Egyptians were not only sustaining their bodies, they were reaffirming community. Of course, the beer was not always plain. In temples or at festivals, brewers mixed in honey, dates, herbs, or spices, turning the porridge-like drink into something richer, heavier, and often more intoxicating. These versions carried a stronger kick enough to loosen tongues and soften the edges of the world. Perhaps that is why beer found its place not only in daily life, but in sacred ritual. The gods themselves were offered beer. In tombs, jars of it were buried alongside the dead gifts to sustain them in the afterlife. To be without beer was unthinkable, both in life and in death. The more one lingers on this detail, the more astonishing it seems. A civilization renowned for mathematics, astronomy, and monumental architecture, yet the heartbeat of daily existence pulsed in a cup of fermented bread. It is a reminder that history is not only built of pyramids and dynasties, but of humble meals of shared jugs in dimly lit rooms of laughter and nourishment drawn from cloudy, frothy brew. In its thick, unrefined texture, beer carried the essence of Egyptian endurance, practical, sustaining, and quietly intoxicating. And so, as the Nile sparkles in the sun and workers return to the fields, you can almost taste the tang of their drink, almost hear the clink of clay cups. The story of beer is not only about survival, it is about the spirit of a people who found strength in simplicity. But beer was only one doorway to altered states. Beyond the frothy jugs and communal straws lay something stranger still, the curling smoke of incense, the sacred perfume called kai-fi, a ladder of fragrance meant to lift the soul itself toward the divine. The afternoon sun blazes high above the Nile, pressing heat down upon temples and fields alike. Within the shadowed courtyards of Egypt's sanctuaries, however, another world begins to take shape. Step softly across the limestone floor, and you will notice how the air changes. Here, it does not smell of sweat or grain. Instead, the space is thick with the sweetness of burning incense, its curls of smoke rising in delicate streams toward painted ceilings. This was kai-fi, a sacred blend of resin, herbs, and spices, more than perfume, more than medicine. To the Egyptians, It was a ladder to the heavens. Imagine the preparation. Priests and perfumers worked together to grind ingredients with careful hands. Frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from distant Ethiopia, cinnamon carried across deserts, juniper berries, honey wine, and raisins. Each element was crushed, heated, and blended in proportions guarded like secrets. The result was pressed into pellets or shaped into cones, which when lit released a dense and fragrant smoke. Kai-fi was not merely burned for fragrance. It was inhaled as medicine applied, as ointment offered as sacrifice, and consumed by the senses as a direct path to the divine. To step into a temple filled with Kai-fi was to step into a cloud where mortal breath and divine essence mingled. Stand for a moment in that smoke. You can feel how it clings to the throat, heavy, almost suffocating. Your eyes water, your chest tightens, but then something else happens. The monotone chanting of priests begins to shift in your perception, sounding deeper, slower, almost otherworldly. The painted gods on the temple walls seem to glow their outlines, shimmering in the haze. A worshiper beside you begins to sway his eyes, half-closed lips, whispering prayers that tumble into half-formed visions. Another sits down suddenly overcome, claiming he has seen a falcon soar through the smoke, though no bird was there. Were these hallucinations or divine revelations? To the Egyptians, the answer was simple. The smoke carried them closer to their gods, and the visions were blessings. Kefi's power extended beyond the temple walls. Physicians recommended it for ailments of the lungs and stomach, mixed into tonics to ease pain, or burned to calm sleeplessness. The scent followed Egyptians through every stage of life. It perfumed hair and clothing, marked moments of joy and mourning, and accompanied the dead into their tombs. Archaeologists have found traces of Kai-fi recipes inscribed on papyri instructions, so detailed they read like sacred spells. Even Pliny the Elder, writing centuries later, described Kai-fi with fascination, noting its ability to soothe, to heal, and to transport. But perhaps the truest magic of Kai-fi was not in its ingredients, but in its effect on the mind. Inhaling it was less about physical healing and more about spiritual travel. The Egyptians believed the smoke could open doors, dissolve boundaries, and thin the veil between the living and the divine. It was not unlike the beer they drank, but subtler, more refined a pathway, not of the stomach, but of the breath. To breathe, kaifi, was to borrow a fragment of eternity, to taste a moment of transcendence that lingered in the body long after the smoke faded. There is something profoundly human in this practice. In every age, people have sought ways to reach beyond themselves through chant, through drink, through prayer, through smoke. The Egyptians, with their meticulous recipes and ritual precision, found a balance between order and ecstasy, crafting a perfume that was also a prayer. In that rising cloud, they glimpsed not only gods, but also the fragile, fleeting beauty of their own lives transformed into something eternal. As the last embers fade on the incense dish, the temple grows quiet. The haze lifts, revealing painted walls once more steady and still. Worshippers stir, stretching, as though waking from dreams. Priests collect the ashes sacred, even in their remains. And outside the desert, wind carries away the final threads of smoke. Yet for those who inhaled the experience, lingers a reminder that the divine could be breathed, tasted, and felt. From these clouds of fragrance, our path drifts onward to stranger plants, still, Beyond the crafted perfume of Kaifai lay roots shrouded in myth and fear, whispered to scream when pulled from the earth. Next we enter the haunting world of the mandrake. The desert evening falls once more, shadows stretching long across the fields. Among the plants of Egypt, papyrus reeds lotus blossoms, and palms, there is one that carries with it an aura of danger and enchantment, the mandrake. Its roots twist into shapes uncannily human, sometimes resembling arms' legs, even faces with gaping mouths. To touch it was to touch mystery itself. In later folklore whispered across centuries, people believed that when the mandrake was pulled from the soil, it would scream a shriek so piercing it could kill. Whether the Egyptians truly believed in that deathly cry is uncertain, yet the mandrake held its place in their rituals, medicine, and myths. A plant half root, half spirit. Imagine the scene: a healer in white linen crouched at dusk near the edge of a field, the mandrake's leaves curling in the fading light. He whispers incantations, hands trembling slightly, for the plant is powerful, but also perilous. Later, tales tell of clever solutions, tying the root to a dog, plugging one's ears, and letting the poor animal pull it free while the human stood at a safe distance. Did Egyptians truly do this? The evidence is thin, but the legend lingers, and perhaps it was born from the way the plant seemed too alive, too human-shaped, to be treated casually. To tug it from the ground without ritual must have felt like desecrating something sacred. What mattered more than the harvest were the uses. Mandrake was infused into wine, steeped into potions, or placed near beds as an aphrodisiac. Its fruits, golden and apple-like, gave off a sweet scent. In Egyptian love poetry, mandrakes are sometimes mentioned, symbols of desire and fertility. Lovers were urged to gather them, to let their fragrance kindle passion. In medicine, the plant could act as a sedative, lulling the troubled into sleep. In higher doses, it could lead to visions or to danger. A cup of mandrake wine might ease pain, but too much could plunge one into oblivion. It was this thin line between remedy and poison that made the root both revered and feared. Archaeological traces strengthen the legend. In tomb paintings, mandrakes appear as offerings, tucked among flowers and fruits. In the burial goods of nobles, small bundles of herbs have been found, some identified as mandrake remains. Their presence beside the dead suggests they were believed to hold protective or guiding powers, helping the soul drift more gently into the afterlife. The plant was more than medicine. It was a charm against fear, a talisman for crossing boundaries. Pause for a moment and imagine holding such a root in your hands. Its body twists like a doll carved from earth, a silent figure with hair of leaves and a face etched by nature's hand. To the ancient mind, it must have seemed impossible that this was mere plant. Surely it was half spirit born of earth and touched by divine fire. To use it was to bargain with unseen powers, to flirt with danger, in the hope of gaining love, healing, or vision. There is an eerie beauty in this. In a land so ordered, so measured by geometry and ritual, the mandrake embodied chaos and uncertainty. It could not be tamed, only respected. Perhaps that is why it lingered so strongly in the imagination long after Egypt's temples had fallen silent. Even today, the mandrake haunts stories and myths, a reminder of how ancient people read magic into the shapes of roots, the scent of fruits, the whispers of plants that grew too strangely to be ignored. The incense has burned low, the mandrake rests once more in its earthen bed, and the night deepens. But Egypt's intoxicating world does not end with myth, for beyond herbs and roots, beyond whispered stories, hard science waits in the tombs. Residues clinging to mummies, sealed jars and burial chambers, all tell us that cannabis, opium, and nicotine accompany the dead as surely as gold and amulets. So let us drift deeper into the silent evidence left behind, where chemistry and ritual intertwine. Step quietly now into the stillness of an Egyptian tomb. The air is heavy, untouched, for millennia, sealed behind stone, until a modern hand pried it open. Darkness presses against painted walls, and in the dim light of an archaeologist's lamp, treasures begin to shimmer: gold masks, carved statues, jars of wine, bundles of linen. Yet among these riches lies something subtler, tiny traces of ancient substances, invisible at first glance, but revealed by careful science. These are the remnants of Egypt's secret chemistry offerings, placed beside the dead to soothe, protect, and perhaps intoxicate on the journey beyond. Residue analysis has told us remarkable stories on the wrappings of mummies within jars, and in the residue of funerary goods, scientists have found hints of cannabis, opium, and even nicotine. At first, this discovery puzzled researchers. Nicotine, after all, was thought to belong only to the New World, centuries beyond Egyptian reach. Was it truly there, or was it contamination from later ages? The debate lingers, but whether imported or symbolic, the presence of these substances speaks to a culture that knew the power of plants and carried them even into death. Opium, drawn from the poppy, soothed pain and invited sleep. Cannabis, burned or consumed, carried the mind into visions. Together, they suggest that the Egyptians understood what we might call altered states and valued them enough to send them with the soul into eternity. Imagine standing at Tutankhamun's side as his tomb was first opened. Among the glittering jewelry and chariots, archaeologists found sealed jars of oils, herbs, and wine. These were not ornaments, but a wellness kit for the afterlife. Wine infused with herbs might steady the spirit. Incense cones could purify the air. Resins might ease the body of the soul double, as it crossed into the land of Osiris. Just as a traveler today might pack medicine, a blanket, and food, so too did the Egyptians pack their pharaohs with sacred substances, remedies, comforts, and tools for journeys where no return was possible. The priests who prepared these burials wielded a quiet power. They knew which resins calmed the spirit, which herbs guided dreams, which mixtures would honor the gods without harming the body. Their recipes were as guarded as the geometry of pyramids, whispered from master to apprentice. To touch these substances was to touch authority itself, for the priesthood controlled not only the gateways of the gods, but the chemistries of ecstasy and peace. A priest, burning cannabis-laced incense, was not indulging in pleasure. He was guiding the soul, shaping the emotional tone of society, weaving divine presence into the air. There is something moving in this blending of luxury and necessity. Gold and alabaster dazzled the eye, but it was the jars of wine, the bundles of herbs, the cones of incense that promised comfort when the soul trembled. Imagine the pharaoh newly departed, rising into a realm of stars, the scent of kaifi clinging to him, a cup of mandrake wine at his side. Death itself was made gentler by the promise of these substances, their powers extending beyond life into eternity. It makes one wonder, were the gods truly in need of such offerings, or were these preparations more for the comfort of the living? Perhaps the priests, the mourners, and the families needed to believe that their loved ones walked armed with medicine and delight. To think of a father or king facing the underworld without these tools might have been unbearable, and so they filled tombs, not only with gold, but with fragments of earth's gifts, roots, resins, herbs, and oils. The silence of the tomb settles once more. The jars stand sealed. The air still carries faint whispers of ancient smoke, and the dead lie wrapped in linen, accompanied by their secret treasures. Yet Egypt's intoxicating practices were not only for the dead. The living, too, surrendered themselves to trance and vision, guided by priests who sang, chanted, and stared into smoke until the boundary of reality itself seemed to quiver. From the sealed tombs, let us step back into the living temple, where voices rise and incense thickens, and where the priests, half human, half divine messengers, held the keys to altered states. Next, we drift into the role of the priesthood, the guardians of trance power in Egypt. The temple doors creak open as the last glow of sunset spills across the courtyard. Inside, shadows stretch high along painted walls, and a steady hum begins a chant low and rhythmic, almost like the heartbeat of the stone itself. This is the world of the Egyptian priesthood, the keepers of ritual knowledge and mystery. They were not merely officials or administrators. They were guardians of altered states, guides into dreams, and interpreters of visions. Without them, the intoxicating world of Egypt would have been only chaos. With them, it became sacred order. Step softly among them, and you would see men clad in spotless linen, their heads shaved in ritual purity. Each carried the scent of incense in his garments, for they burned kaifi daily until the fragrance clung like a second skin. Their lives were disciplined, bound to the cycles of temple rituals, but within that discipline lay hidden arts. They knew the recipes for incense that lifted the mind, the hymns that opened doors to visions, the rhythms of chanting that lulled listeners into trances. In a world without written manuals of psychology or chemistry, priests were both. They were scientists of the unseen, weaving sound, smoke, and substance into spiritual experiences. Picture a ritual, a chamber lit only by flickering oil lamps, the air heavy with sweet resin. The high priest steps forward, his voice steady and measured, reciting words older than the walls themselves. Around him, younger priests sway in rhythm, their voices layering into a hypnotic chorus. The smoke thickens, filling the lungs, numbing the senses. Hours pass like moments. Those who enter this space emerge altered. Some claim to have seen falcons soar through the haze, or serpents coil along the walls, or even to have spoken with gods themselves. To the Egyptians, these visions were not hallucinations, but truths revealed, messages from the divine carried on smoke and song. Dreams, too, were sacred territory. Priests were trained to interpret them, to read omens in the wanderings of the sleeping mind. In special sanctuaries, the sick might be brought to sleep, their dreams observed, their visions recorded. Healing could come not through herbs alone, but through revelation, as if the gods themselves prescribed the cure in whispers of the night. The priests, as interpreters, held enormous sway. What they saw in the smoke or heard in a dream could shape decisions of kings, guide armies, or soothe the grief of families. They stood at the meeting point of body, mind, and spirit. There is a subtle power in this role. Pharaohs wore crowns of gold, but priests held the knowledge of ecstasy, of trance, of communion. They were not warriors, yet they could sway the course of kingdoms. To the people, their authority was not questioned, for their words carried the weight of vision. A priest who claimed to have spoken with Hathor or Osiris could move the hearts of thousands. Their mastery of incense, chanting, and herbs made them indispensable not only in temples, but in funerals, healings, and festivals. They were the conductors of Egypt's spiritual symphony. Pause and consider what this means. In a society obsessed with order, measured fields aligned pyramids, precise calendars, the priests created controlled chaos. They opened gateways into states of mind that defied geometry, into dreams and visions that dissolved boundaries. Yet they did so with precision, keeping ecstasy within the framework of ritual. It was not drunken madness or uncontrolled frenzy. It was structured, transcendence chaos held gently within the hands of order. And so the priests walked a delicate line, half in the world of the living, half in the smoke of the divine. Their chants echoed through chambers long after the last ember died, their visions shaping the fate of Egypt. To enter their world was to surrender control, to breathe deeply of smoke and sound, and to emerge touched by eternity. The ritual ends. Lamps flicker, the chant fades, and silence settles once more. The priests bow their heads, the smoke thins, and the doors of the temple close. Outside, the Nile glitters, under starlight, its waters carrying whispers of the gods. Yet Egypt's intoxicating journey does not rest here. Beyond the priest's chambers lies another gift of intoxication, one found in the gardens in blossoms, floating on water, and in goblets filled with wine. Next, we drift into the world of the blue lotus and the sacred intoxication of wine. The night is cool along the banks of the Nile, and the water glimmers with 1,000 reflections of starlight. Among the reeds and lilies, another flower opens delicate petals of blue, rising above the water's surface, its fragrance faintly sweet and strangely hypnotic. This is the blue lotus, sacred to the Egyptians, both a symbol of rebirth and a subtle key to altered states. Alongside wine, it became one of the most beloved pathways to joy vision and communion with the divine. Step into a banquet hall, its walls painted with dancers, musicians, and vines heavy with grapes. The tables groan under roasted meats, honeyed cakes, and bowls of figs. Servants move quietly, with clay jars of wine pouring into cups, shaped like lotus blossoms. But these are not simple cups of red or white. The wine is steeped with petals of the blue lotus, their essence blending with the drink. When sipped, it is not only intoxicating to the body, but uplifting to the spirit, carrying the drinker into a haze of laughter, song, and sometimes visions. The combination of alcohol and the lotus's subtle psychoactive properties was powerful enough to blur the edges of reality, making every banquet a step closer to the gods. Imagine reclining on woven mats among nobles and scribes, the air filled with music of harps and flutes. Women swirl in graceful dances, their hair scented with perfumed cones that slowly melt in the heat. releasing fragrance down their shoulders. You lift a cup of lotus wine, the liquid shimmering, the petals drifting within. As you drink, a warmth spreads through your chest, softening the burdens of the day. The chatter grows louder, laughter rolls like a tide, and some begin to claim visions, flashes of radiant light, glimpses of falcons or jackals, whispers of gods across the veil. Whether or not these were true divine messages, the experience was transformative. For the Egyptians, such states were not indulgence, but connection, a way of opening the mind to truths otherwise hidden. The lotus itself was deeply symbolic. Each morning, its petals closed and sank into the river only to rise again with the sun blooming fresh with light. It became an emblem of rebirth, resurrection, and the eternal cycles of life. To drink it in wine was to internalize that renewal, to taste immortality in liquid form. In tomb paintings, guests at feasts are often shown holding lotus blossoms to their noses, inhaling the flower's essence, as if to breathe in eternity. In poetry, lovers compared themselves to lotus blooms, their passion as fragrant and fleeting as the flower's daily life. The symbolism wove through religion, art, and desire alike. Wine itself was a luxury rarer than beer grown in vineyards along the Nile, and treasured by the elite. Yet, when combined with lotus, it transcended mere drink. It became a vessel of spiritual journey. At festivals, lotus wine was poured as offerings to the gods, as though the intoxication it created on earth was mirrored in heaven. Priests used it in rituals, nobles in their banquets, and even in death jars of lotus wine were sealed within tombs, so the departed might sip in the afterlife. To deny someone wine and lotus was to deny them joy and renewal, both in life and beyond. Pause for a moment and imagine the sensory haze of such a gathering, torches flickering on painted walls, the perfume of lotus and melted cones heavy in the air, the taste of sweet wine thick with petals, the sound of laughter rising like birds into the night sky. It was a feast not only for the body but for the soul, a reminder that the Egyptians embraced joy as a divine right. In their union of wine and lotus, they found a path to transcendence, a way of stepping beyond the harshness of desert days into a realm of beauty, love, and vision. As the banquet winds down, guests recline in contented stupor, the last notes of music drifting into silence. Servants clear the jars, petals sink to the bottoms of cups, and the air cools as dawn approaches. Yet with intoxication comes consequence. For even in Egypt, the morning after was not forgotten. In papyri and remedies, we find whispered complaints of aching heads and remedies for pounding temples. And so from the sweet intoxication of lotus wine, we drift into the hangovers of the gods themselves and the cures they trusted. Dawn has come again to the Nile, and with it the quiet groans of a city that celebrated too well the night before. The revelry of festivals, the banquets of nobles, and the endless jars of beer and lotus wine left their mark. Beneath the painted ceilings of temple, servants sweep away fallen petals and empty cups, while outside ordinary Egyptians rub their temples and squint against the rising sun. Even in a land of gods and sacred rituals, no one was free from the most human of afflictions, the hangover. Imagine waking on a woven mat after a night of heavy drinking. The clay jug beside you is empty, the reed straw fallen to the floor. Your mouth is dry, your stomach unsettled, and your head pounds as if struck by the hammer of Ptah himself. Outside, the sun races far too brightly, and the chants of the priests drift like needles into your aching ears. This was not merely a problem for peasants or festival crowds. Even pharaohs, after long nights of banquets, surely felt the weight of their indulgence. And so the Egyptians, pragmatic as ever, developed remedies. The medical papyri of Egypt, rolled sheets of inked wisdom kept by scribes, describe treatments for pains of the head. These were not vague mutterings, but carefully written instructions. Some recommended a mixture of herbs and honey spread on bread, or stirred into water to soothe the body and calm the stomach. Others suggested aromatic plants, such as willow celery or coriander, brewed into infusions. For the worst cases, priests might prescribe rest in darkened chambers breathing incense meant to relax the mind. There are even hints that music soft and rhythmic was thought to ease pain, as though harmony could chase away the chaos of intoxication. The remedies reveal something deeper, that the Egyptians did not separate the physical from the spiritual. A pounding head was not only a bodily complaint, but also a disruption of balance, a sign that one had brushed too close to the divine fire and needed restoration. To heal was to restore harmony, not only to the body, but to the ka, the spiritual essence, lying still wrapped in linens, inhaling the sweet smoke of kaifi. A sufferer might have felt not only relief, but also purification, as though the gods themselves were pressing cool hands upon the brow. And yet, there is a touch of humor in this too. We cannot help but imagine an Egyptian scribe tasked with recording grand decrees of pharaohs and the sacred geometry of temples, setting down his reed pen one morning and muttering about his aching head. Perhaps he wrote a cure into the papyrus, not only for posterity, but for his own survival. Archaeology may remain silent on hangovers, but human experience does not. The Egyptians lived as fully as we do, and in their search for relief, they remind us of our shared humanity across millennia. In a way, the hangover is the price of joy. To drink deeply at the feast of drunkenness, to sip lotus wine at banquets, to lose oneself in trance. Beneath temple smoke, these were blessings, but they demanded balance. The Egyptians knew that the body must be cared for even as the spirit soared. Their cures were small rituals in themselves, a morning counterpart to the night's chaos. And in those quiet dawns, with herbs pressed to aching temples, they found their way back to order. As the city stirs again, farmers return to fields, scribes unroll their papyri, and priests resume their chants. The pain fades, the balance is restored, and life continues. Yet the question lingers, if hangovers plagued even the gods, what else did they carry into eternity? What tools, what remedies, what sacred substances were packed away in their tombs to ease the passage beyond death? From the weary mornings of the living, we drift now into the sealed silence of the dead, and to the curious wellness kits buried with kings like Tutankhamun. The desert lies hushed beneath the weight of centuries. Sand drifts against cliffs, and in the valley of the kings, the entrances to tombs sit hidden, sealed and silent. Then, in 1922, a small team led by Howard Carter pried open a doorway that had been closed for more than 3,000 years. Inside the tomb of Tutankhamun revealed itself a chamber glittering with gold-carved furniture and treasures meant to accompany a boy king into eternity. But among the dazzling relics, something quieter caught the eyes of archaeologists' jars, oils, herbs, and wines. It was in many ways the ancient Egyptian version of a wellness kit. Imagine crouching by the flickering light of a lantern as Carter's team carefully catalogued each item. There were alabaster jars filled with perfumed ointments, their surfaces still smooth after millennia. Clay vessels sealed with resin contained thickened wine, its scent faint but lingering. Bundles of dried herbs lay tucked among amulets and beads preserved, as if their fragrance might still be needed. By the Ko, the spirit double of the young pharaoh, these were not simply luxuries for display. They were tools, comforts, and remedies, packed like a traveler's bag for the greatest journey of all the passage into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul required nourishment and protection even after death. Gold and jewels signaled status, but oils and herbs offered something far more intimate care. Wine might ease the soul into dreams, incense could cleanse the air, and resins soothed body and spirit alike. The presence of these items suggests a remarkable truth, that the Egyptians carried their knowledge of altered states of comfort and healing into eternity. Just as a living pharaoh might ease his insomnia with a draught of mandrake wine or a cone of kai smoke, so too might his spirit find peace through these offerings in the halls of Osiris. The priests who prepared Tutankhamun's burial knew this well. Their task was not only to wrap the king in linen and seal his chamber, but also to ensure that his journey was eased at every step. They blended ointments with precision, labeled jars with care, and arranged the wellness kit among the treasures, as though to whisper, "You will not suffer thirst, you will not suffer pain, you will not be without joy." In their hands, pharmacology became theology, chemistry became comfort. Their knowledge gave them power, for they were not merely servants of ritual, but custodians of the deepest human needs: relief, peace, and hope. Pause for a moment and imagine the boy king himself, Tutankhamun, drifting into death. Perhaps he lay restless, burdened by pain or fever, his young body frail. The priests entered lighting incense, offering draughts of calming mixtures, singing low hymns to soothe his passing. When he crossed into the beyond, those same substances were placed beside him, as if to continue their work in realms unseen. The jars of wine, the bundles of herbs, the cones of incense, each one a promise that he would not walk alone, that he would carry with him the comforts of earth. There is a strange familiarity in this practice. Modern travelers pack medicine, perfumes, and snacks for long journeys. Even today, mourners place flowers, favorite foods, or personal tokens into coffins. Across time, the impulse is the same: to ease the unknown with the familiar, to soften death with the comforts of life. Tutankhamun's wellness kit reminds us that behind the grandeur of pharaohs and the scale of pyramids, there was always this tender truth. Egyptians loved, feared, and cared as we do. As Carter's team closed their notebooks and lanterns flickered low, the jars and herbs of the boy king remained in place, quiet witnesses of ancient care. For us, they are a reminder that Egypt's obsession with the afterlife was not only about glory and power, it was about compassion. And yet, the story does not rest here, for beyond the golden tombs and jars of oil lay something even more profound. the daily philosophy of ecstasy and balance, the belief that altered states were not indulgence, but survival. From Tutankhamun's sealed chambers, let us drift now to the wider wisdom of Egypt, to the everyday ecstasy and order that defined their world. The sun soars once more over Egypt, casting long shadows across the temples and villages. The day's work is finished, fields left silent, and families gather within mud brick homes. From the outside, the scene looks ordinary: children laughing softly, parents sharing food, the quiet hum of conversation. Yet beneath this simplicity lies a profound truth. For the Egyptians, ecstasy and order were not opposites. They were partners woven together to sustain life in a world both beautiful and harsh. Consider how the Egyptians lived. By day, they measured land with ropes, tracked the stars with precision, and carved monuments in lines so exact they still puzzle modern minds. Their world prized balance between the flooding Nile and the parched desert, between chaos and control, between life and death. Yet when evening fell, they did not shy away from letting order soften into joy. Beer, incense, mandrake wine, and lotus were not indulgences set apart from daily life. They were woven into it, reminders that the soul needed release as much as the body needed bread. Imagine a laborer returning home after hours of hauling stone or tilling fields. He sits with his family, dipping bread into a bowl of thick beer. The taste is sour, the texture grainy, but it soothes his hunger and lifts his spirit. His children sip from smaller cups, giggling as the froth clings to their lips. His wife lights a small cone of incense, letting the smoke drift through the room, carrying away the must of the day. In that simple moment, ecstasy is not wild intoxication, but a gentle easing of burdens. The family rests in harmony, finding joy in the very tools that once lifted priests into visions and guided pharaohs into the afterlife. The same pattern appears in grander settings. Pharaohs and nobles feasted with lotus wine and music, not only to display wealth, but to taste transcendence. Priests inhaled kaifi, not only for ritual, but to guide their spirits toward the gods. Farmers drank their beer, not only to survive, but to share laughter at the close of day. From lowest peasant to highest king, ecstasy was democratized, carried in cups and smoke in roots and flowers. In Egypt, intoxication was not rebellion, it was order's companion, a sanctioned passage into states that healed, united, and renewed. There is wisdom in this balance. The Egyptians lived with constant threats: disease, famine, accidents, wars. Life was uncertain, death ever present. To face such fragility, they did not harden into severity alone. They allowed space for joy, for altered states, for rituals that reminded them of life's fleeting beauty. In their philosophy, ecstasy was not escape, but resilience. To laugh in Hathor's feast, to dream beneath Kaifi's smoke, to sip wine infused with lotus, these were acts of survival as necessary as bread or water. They stitched chaos into the fabric of order, and in that weaving they endured. Pause and let the image settle: the great pyramids, rising above the desert, symbols of permanence, and beneath them, ordinary people lifting cups of beer, burning cones of incense, breathing deeply of the world's gifts. Their monuments tell of kings and gods, but their daily lives tell of something humbler and perhaps more profound: that to live well is to balance precision with pleasure, order with ecstasy. The harsh sun with the cool release of dreams. And so chapter 1 draws to a close. From festivals of drunkenness to beer as daily bread, from the smoke of Kai-Fi to the roots of mandrake, from tomb offerings to the wellness kits of King's Egypt, reveals itself not only as a land of monuments, but as a land of altered states. They sought communion with gods, not by fleeing the senses, but by deepening them, turning intoxication into ritual and chaos into sacred order. The night in Egypt fades, the temples grow quiet, and the Nile flows steadily onward. But history, like the river, does not stop. From the sands of Egypt, we will drift into another world, one of powdered faces, plucked brows, and bodies bound by fashion. Renaissance beauty awaits us, where ecstasy took the form of elegance, and the pursuit of perfection reshaped the human body itself. Florence, late 1400s. The streets glow with lantern light, but inside wealthy homes, a quieter ritual unfolds before polished mirrors of polished metal or glass. Women sit patiently as attendants approach with tweezers, cloths, and sharp fingers. One by one, strands of hair are plucked from the brow, then the temples, then the very edge of the hairline. It is a painful process, but the result is clear. A broad, shining forehead pale, and high the mark of Renaissance beauty. To the modern eye, the practice seems strange, almost grotesque. Yet in Florence, Venice, and courts across Europe, a smooth, high forehead signaled intelligence, nobility, and refinement. The more rounded and expansive it appeared, the closer a woman seemed to the ideals painted by artists and celebrated by poets. A natural hairline was not enough. It had to be sculpted. Eyebrows, too, were sacrificed, thinned, until they were nearly invisible, sometimes removed entirely. In portraits of the era, women appear serene and pale, their faces framed by soft curves and bare skin, their beauty at once ethereal and unsettling. Imagine the experience itself. An attendant tugs at strands of hair, pulling sharply as the woman winces but says nothing. The skin reddens, tiny tears spring to her eyes, but still she endures. It is not vanity alone that drives her. It is survival within a world where beauty equals power and neglect could mean ridicule or exclusion from noble circles. Mothers guided their daughters into this ritual, teaching them to value the sting of tweezers as an investment in status. Poets wrote verses praising lofty brows, while artists like Piero della Francesca and Sandro Botticelli painted women with impossibly smooth foreheads. Beauty here was not individual taste, but cultural consensus. To refuse the ritual was to risk being seen as unfashionable, ignorant, even lesser in intelligence. In a society that prized appearance as reflection of virtue, the body became canvas and proof alike. Pause for a moment and feel the contradiction. This was the Renaissance, the age of rediscovering anatomy, of celebrating the human body in sculpture and paint. Yet real women were asked to erase parts of themselves, brows, hairlines, expressions in pursuit of ideals. Their faces became living frescoes, carefully curated to match an imagined standard. Beneath the pale calm of portraits lay hours of discomfort and the quiet endurance of women who carried beauty like a burden. Still, there was pride in it too. To walk into a salon with a gleaming forehead skin, powdered to porcelain, was to command attention. It was a silent proclamation. I belong to the noble order, I embody grace. I am intelligent, refined, untouchable, pain transformed into power, and bare brows into crowns invisible yet potent. As the plucking ends, cloths are pressed gently to the reddened skin, powders applied to soften the flush. The woman rises, her forehead gleaming in the candlelight, her expression calm despite the sting. She has endured. She has become, at least for tonight, the ideal of Renaissance Florence. But beauty did not stop at the brow. The forehead was only the beginning of a transformation that reached down through the very torso. Beneath layers of brocade and velvet, another secret was hidden: corsets and stay-stiff garments that reshaped the body into a canvas of elegance. And so from the face, we drift downward to the body, bound in fabric and whalebone. The room is lit by candlelight shadows, flickering across carved wooden beams. A noblewoman stands with arms slightly raised, as her attendants begin the slow ritual of dressing her. Before the gowns, before the shimmering brocade, comes the foundation, the corset, or as the Renaissance called it, the stay. It is a stiffened garment of linen, sometimes reinforced with whalebone reeds, or hardened paste, laced tightly at the back. The purpose is not to pinch the waist into impossible thinness that would come later in fashion history, but to flatten, smooth, and reshape the torso into a rigid canvas. Imagine the sensation as the laces tighten, breath grows shallow, ribs press inward, and the body feels both supported and confined. The garment restricts movement, yet it also holds the wearer upright, forcing the back straight, the shoulders square. In portraits, the effect is clear: elongated silhouettes, busts, lifted torsos, firm and unyielding. The corset transformed the natural softness of the human body into something closer to architecture, a structure to be draped in heavy fabrics and ornament. To Renaissance society, this transformation was not cruelty, but elegance. A woman who wore stays appeared composed, disciplined, noble. The garment communicated wealth as much as beauty, for only those of high rank could afford both the materials and the attendants needed to lace them properly. Working women, peasants, and artisans did not wear such restrictions daily. Their bodies bent with labor, their garments were loose for necessity. But in the halls of Florence and Venice, the corset became the silent badge of class, marking the difference between those who worked the land and those who floated above it in salons and courts. Consider the contradiction. This was an age of rediscovering the body through art. Michelangelo carved the David muscles rippling with life. Leonardo studied anatomy in meticulous sketches. Yet in real life, women were bound into garments that denied the natural contours of their bodies, flattening and stiffening them into idealized forms. Beauty was less about freedom than control, less about natural grace than disciplined elegance. To be beautiful was to endure discomfort quietly, to wear restraint as if it were privilege. There is also a deeper layer of symbolism. The corset was not only physical, but social. It taught stillness, composure, and patience. A woman who wore one learned to move carefully, to sit upright, to take delicate breaths. It molded not only the body, but the very demeanor of its wearer. Grace became second nature, not through freedom, but through practice under restriction. It was a performance of refinement, and each laced cord was a reminder that beauty was discipline disguised as splendor. Yet despite the discomfort, many women found pride in the ritual. To be laced into stays was to be prepared for the theater of life, the banquets and dances where reputation was forged. The first tug of the laces might sting, but the final knot brought transformation, a shift from ordinary woman to noble vision. Attendants stepped back. The gown was drawn over, and in the mirror's glow, the silhouette was no longer soft, but statuesque, ready to command attention in the candlelit hall. Pause, and picture it, a gathering in a Florentine palace, music drifting from lutes, tables set with gilded dishes. Women glide between pillars, their movements restricted, but graceful, their stays holding them, like invisible scaffolding. To modern eyes, it seems a strange kind of beauty, yet in that time, it was elegance incarnate. The corset was not simply a garment, it was a philosophy that art could shape the body, that discipline was itself beautiful. As the music rises and laughter fills the hall, the corseted figures move with practiced grace, never showing the strain beneath the silks. But the banquet that awaits is more than a sepulchre for gowns and jewels. It is also a theater of manners, where women must balance hunger, etiquette, and elegance under the watchful gaze of society. And so we drift from the lacing chamber into the feasting hall, where beauty was tested at the banquet table. The great hall glows with firelight, shadows of carved beams stretching across painted walls, tables groan beneath the weight of roasted peacocks with gilded feathers, marzipan sculptures shaped into towers, platters of fruit glazed with honey, and goblets of sweet spiced wine. Music swells from lutes and recorders, and the murmur of voices rises like a tide. To enter such a banquet is to step into a theater of wealth and beauty. Yet for the noblewoman seated at the table, this feast is not indulgence, it is performance. Every sip, every bite, every gesture is part of a delicate dance of etiquette. Imagine her seated in a stiff corset, velvet sleeves heavy on her arms, a jeweled necklace pressing against her throat. Before her lies a feast fit for kings, yet she cannot eat freely. To devour would be vulgar, to appear too hungry would invite whispers. She must nibble delicately, lift her cup with steady grace, and smile at conversation, though her ribs press uncomfortably against her stays. The feast is not for her pleasure, but for display, to prove her refinement, her discipline, her ability to inhabit beauty even under strain. Around her men laugh loudly, tearing meat from bones, while women smile softly and conceal their hunger. To eat sparingly was itself a sign of nobility. The body was to be slender, the appetite restrained. Food became symbol, not sustenance, and the banquet hall a stage where social order was rehearsed each night. To falter, to spill, to eat too heartily, to laugh too loud, was to risk one's reputation. In this way, dining was as much a trial as the corset itself, a test of poise beneath layers of expectation. The contradiction is striking. Outside the palace, peasants bent over steaming bowls of porridge, tearing bread hungrily after long days in the fields. For them, food was life itself, survival against hunger. Inside, for the elite, food became ornament. Peacocks were roasted not for taste, but for spectacle, their feathers gilded to impress. Sugar was sculpted into towers too delicate to eat, symbols of wealth rather than nourishment. The noblewoman at the table, though surrounded by abundance, often left the hall having eaten little, her hunger concealed beneath layers of elegance. And yet, within this restraint, beauty thrived. To glide through a banquet with composure was to embody Renaissance ideals of grace: the soft laugh at the right moment, the controlled sip of wine, the gentle turn of the head beneath a jeweled veil. All these were performances that built reputation and secured alliances. A woman who carried herself well at table strengthened her family's honor as surely as a soldier defended it on the battlefield. The hall was not only a place of feasting, but of politics, courtship, and silent negotiations. Beauty was the weapon and etiquette, the armor. Pause and imagine the sensory world, the sweet perfume of spiced wine mingling with roasted meats, the glitter of candlelight on gold cups, the heat of torches flickering against frescoed walls. Beneath it all, the hum of conversation swells, laughter rolling like waves, music lifting above it, and the noblewoman sitting straight-backed, smiling serenely while her body aches and her stomach growls softly. She endures because endurance is beauty, because control is grace. As the night wanes, servants clear the dishes, carrying away platters barely touched. Musicians play a final song, and the guests drift toward salons and dance halls. The noblewoman rises carefully, her movements still graceful, though her body longs for relief. The banquet is over, but the performance continues. For beyond food and conversation lies another layer of Renaissance beauty, the power of scent. In halls thick with perfume fragrance, became as vital as clothing, a declaration of wealth and allure. And so from the banquet table, we drift now into the invisible art of perfume. The banquet hall empties, the laughter fading into the corridors, yet a trace of fragrance lingers in the air. Roses, musk, amber, and spices mingle with the smoke of torches, leaving behind a memory of the evening. In Renaissance Europe, beauty was not only seen, it was smelled. Perfume carried as much weight as velvet or jewels, a silent declaration of status. The noblewoman who entered a salon was expected to trail clouds of fragrance behind her, so rich and intoxicating that heads turned before she even spoke. Perfume was both art and commerce. Venice became the center of European distillation, importing exotic resins from Arabia, frankincense and myrrh, from Ethiopia, cinnamon, and cloves from the East Indies. Distillers experimented with oils, alcohol, and water to capture the essence of roses, violets, and jasmine. Bottles of crystal and gilded glass held these precious liquids, often worth more than gold by weight. To own perfume was to prove wealth. To wear it well was to prove refinement. In a world where bathing was irregular and heavy gowns trapped sweat, fragrance was not luxury alone. It was necessity. Picture a noblewoman preparing for an evening gathering. Her maid opens a carved wooden box lined with velvet, inside which rest small vials of perfume. She selects one infused with rose water and musk, dabbing it onto her wrists, behind her ears, along the lace edge of her gown. Another scent, heavier with amber and cloves, is sprinkled lightly into her hair. As she steps into the salon, her perfume drifts ahead of her like an invisible herald, announcing her presence before her voice can. Those who pass her are left with a faint intoxication, as if beauty itself could be inhaled. Beyond bottled fragrance, another practice endured: scented cones. These were small lumps of perfumed wax or resin, sometimes placed directly on the head. In Egypt, they had melted slowly in the heat, releasing fragrance as it trickled down hair and skin. Renaissance Europe adopted the idea differently, weaving perfumed cloths into gowns or sewing sachets of herbs into sleeves and bodices. Each movement released a faint perfume surrounding the wearer with a subtle aura. It was a quiet art, ensuring that grace was not only seen, but breathed in by those nearby. Perfume also carried symbolic weight. Certain scents were linked to purity, others to seduction. Rose water might suggest innocence and nobility, while musk hinted at passion and mystery. To select a perfume was to send a message, a silent language spoken through the air. In crowded salons where words were bound by etiquette, fragrance could whisper what the tongue could not. Lovers exchanged scented handkerchiefs as tokens their perfumes, lingering long after the touch had faded. Pause and imagine the sensory tapestry of a Florentine salon. Music drifts from lute's candlelight, flickers on frescoed walls, and the air itself seems to shimmer with layers of fragrance, jasmine from one corner, clove from another, rose and musk mingling in the center of the hall. To walk among these scents was to step into a living bouquet, dizzying yet exquisite. It was beauty turned into atmosphere, a cloud that wrapped the elite in an aura of elegance. And yet, there was strain beneath the sweetness. Perfume did not only mask sweat, it masked discomfort, fatigue, and hunger. It was another layer of performance, another way beauty demanded endurance, to smile serenely while aching under corsets, to glide gracefully while feet throbbed in high shoes, and to smell perpetually of roses despite the body's protests. This was the invisible labor of Renaissance beauty. As the evening winds down, the scents begin to fade, clinging faintly to velvet and hair. Servants open windows, letting in the cooler night air. Perfume lingers, like memory vanishing slowly, yet leaving behind the impression of wealth, allure, and refinement. But fragrance was only one layer of splendor. The fabrics themselves, the velvets, brocades, and silks spoke their own language of power and beauty. And so, from invisible perfume, we drift into the weight and shimmer of cloth. The first thing you notice is the weight. Renaissance clothing was not light or flowing. It was heavy, layered, and commanding. When a noblewoman stepped into a salon or cathedral, she carried not only the gaze of society, but the literal burden of her garments. Chief among these were velvet and brocade fabrics, so rich and costly that to wear them was to embody wealth itself. Their textures shimmered beneath candlelight, their colors deep as jewels, and their weight a constant reminder that beauty was never effortless. Velvet was the fabric of choice for the powerful. Thick, soft, and absorbent of color, it draped heavily across the body, creating an aura of richness. Deep crimson, lapis blue, forest green, and black, dyed with rare substances, all announced wealth to anyone who looked. To wear velvet in the heat of summer was a statement. I am so important that discomfort cannot touch me. The heavier the gown, the more enviable the wearer appeared. Beneath its folds, bodies sweated, but on the surface elegance glowed like painted silk. Brocade elevated this even further. Woven with metallic threads of gold or silver, brocade was less garment and more tapestry. Lions' vines and even entire biblical scenes could be woven into a gown. These were not subtle accents. A noblewoman's dress could glimmer like an altarpiece, each thread catching fire in the glow of torchlight. Wearing brocade was to become living artwork, a portable fresco that walked, danced, and dined. The more intricate the design, the more time and money it cost, and thus, the greater the prestige. Brocade was not merely fashion, it was a proclamation of power stitched into cloth. Imagine entering a banquet hall filled with such garments. Velvet gowns in jewel tones sweep across the floor, brocade patterns glint with sacred imagery, and layers of silk rustle beneath. The hall becomes a moving gallery of fabric, each figure a painting brought to life. To walk among them is to feel the weight of centuries of labor, the dyers, the weavers, the embroiderers, all whose hands made these wonders possible. Beauty here was not only the work of the woman who wore it, but of the invisible network of artisans who clothed her. And yet, the beauty came with strain. Velvet was hot, brocade stiff, and both were heavy enough to restrict movement. Women learned to glide rather than stride to carry their gowns with poise despite the drag of fabric. Servants followed, lifting hems to prevent them from soiling in streets or catching on steps. To wear velvet and brocade was to perform constant vigilance, every step measured, every gesture calculated. It was beauty, but beauty as discipline once more. Pause and consider the contrast. Outside these halls, peasants wore coarse linen and wool, their garments patched and faded from years of use. Their clothes were light, practical, and designed for labor. Inside, the elite wrapped themselves in fabrics that hindered work, fabrics that declared through their very impracticality, I do not labor, I rule. Clothing became language, a visible grammar of wealth and authority. Each fold of velvet, each gleam of gold thread reinforced social order, and still there was splendor. Imagine the sensation of running your hand along brocade-raised patterns, like embossed metal catching light with every movement. Imagine velvet catching candlelight, shifting from deep shadow to glowing sheen with a single gesture. These were fabrics made not only to be worn, but to be seen, admired, envied. They were theater stitched into every gown. As the evening lingers and the music rises, the noble women move like living icons, their gowns glowing against frescoed walls. But beneath the shimmer of velvet and the glint of gold, another trial awaits. For at their feet lies the most perilous of fashions, shoes so high, so impractical, that each step was a gamble. From the weight of gowns, we drift downward to the impossible elegance of towering chopines. The music of the banquet fades, but the rustle of gowns continues as noble women prepare to leave the hall. Attendants move quickly, straightening hems and adjusting sleeves for the next challenge. Awaits not the eyes of courtiers, nor the weight of velvet, but the shoes upon which every step depends. These are no ordinary slippers. In Renaissance Europe, especially in Venice, fashion demanded chopins, towering platform shoes that raised women sometimes more than 20 inches from the ground. Imagine the sight, a woman gliding across a marble floor, her head towering above the crowd, her gown sweeping like a moving curtain. At first glance, she seems ethereal, almost floating, but beneath the fabric strapped to her feet are platforms of wood or cork covered in brocade or velvet, sometimes painted with patterns of vines and flowers. Each step is a calculation. Too quick and balance wavers. Too careless and disaster follows. To wear chopines was not only to display height, but to display control, poise, and wealth. These shoes were far from practical. Walking in them without help was nearly impossible. Servants often supported their mistresses, one on each arm, ensuring that the lofty steps did not end in an undignified fall. Streets in Venice were uneven, slick with water, crowded with people. To walk in Chopins was to gamble with dignity, yet to refuse them was unthinkable. Height equaled status, and the more impractical the footwear, the greater the statement. I live so far above necessity that I can afford danger in the name of beauty. Consider the weight of the body, in stays wrapped in layers of velvet, the air thick with perfume, and now feet perched precariously on platforms. Each gesture, each step was rehearsed, transformed into a dance of survival. Noble women learned to glide rather than walk, to move slowly with attendants at their side, as if their very fragility was a kind of elegance. To stumble was humiliation, to fall was catastrophe, yet to succeed to move with calm grace upon cake stilts was to command admiration like no other. Pause and picture the hush that might fall across a gathering as a noblewoman entered in Chopins. Heads turned upward, skirts swayed like waves, and her slow steps became part of the spectacle. Every inch of fabric, every shimmer of brocade, every perfume in the air was magnified by her height. She became more than human, an icon of wealth, elevated above ordinary mortals. The shoes were not simply footwear. They were stages strapped to her body, lifting her into myth. And yet beneath the grandeur, there was pain. The pressure on the feet was relentless, the risk constant. Ankles twisted, toes cramped, calves strained to maintain balance. A single misstep could send a woman tumbling, endangering both body and dignity. But such was the price of beauty in the Renaissance. To endure discomfort silently was to prove refinement. To walk tall despite risk was to embody power itself. There is a strange poetry in it. These shoes, impractical to the point of absurdity, became symbols of control. Control over the body, over perception, over society's gaze. The noblewoman in Chopin's was not only taller, she was untouchable, floating in a realm above daily life. Her danger was her strength, her fragility, her power. As night falls and the streets grow quiet, the shoes are finally removed. Attendants unbuckle straps, lift away the platforms, and place them aside like artifacts of theater. The noblewoman steps down her body, sighing in relief. Her feet tender but free, yet her performance is not over. For in salons and dance halls, grace is demanded once more, not through height this time, but through movement. From the impossible balance of Chopin's, we drift now into the art of the dance, where every step and gesture revealed as much as any gown or jewel. The hall is cleared, benches pushed back against frescoed walls, and the musicians tune their lutes and viols. Candles drip wax into the glow of polished floors, and nobles gather in circles of expectation. For Renaissance society, dance was more than amusement. It was training theater, and courtship a ritual where beauty was tested step by step. To dance gracefully was as essential as noble birth. Without it, elegance collapsed and reputation faltered. Imagine a young one stepping forward, corseted, draped in velvet, her shoes narrow and pointed. Every movement is watched. She bows lightly, her chin poised, her arms flowing in careful arcs. The music begins, a slow, galliard notes lifting like the steady beat of wings. She takes a step, then another, her skirts swaying in rhythm. The floor seems to tilt beneath her, but her face remains serene. To falter, to stumble even slightly, would invite whispers, but to glide with balance and poise was to prove refinement, intellect, and worth. Dance tutors were common in noble households. Families hired them the way modern families might hire music instructors. Children learned to step in rhythm, to bow correctly, to turn without tripping hymns or tangling sleeves. For daughters especially, dance was an introduction to society, a performance that revealed not only grace, but readiness for marriage. In a single evening, a woman's movements could impress intrigue or condemn her in the eyes of the elite. Beauty was not simply in the face or the gown, it was in how she carried herself when all eyes were upon her. Pause for a moment and imagine the strain beneath the grace. Corsets pressed against ribs, shoes pinched toes, and heavy fabrics dragged with each step. Yet the dancer must move as though weightless, smiling softly, never gasping for breath. To sway too heavily or pant for air was to shatter the illusion. The body became a stage, rehearsed into silence, masking effort with serenity. Beauty here was endurance hidden beneath the shimmer of movement. The dances themselves were intricate, filled with symbolic gestures. Hands touched lightly, eyes met in fleeting glances, steps mirrored and intertwined. A bow was more than courtesy, it was communication. A turn was more than rhythm, it was flirtation. In these subtle codes, nobles expressed affection, rivalry, ambition, and pride. Dance halls became arenas of silent drama where alliances began, romances sparked, and reputations rose or fell. Each leap, each measured step was as significant as a line in a poem. Consider the galliard, a dance of leaps and kicks, demanding strength even from men trained in swordplay. For women, every lift was a gamble against faintness, every spin a negotiation with balance. Yet to succeed was triumph. A well-executed dance could secure admiration, open doors to courtship, and elevate a family's honor. To falter was to lose opportunity, sometimes irretrievably. And yet, despite the pressure, there was beauty undeniable. Picture the glow of torchlight on polished floors, gowns sweeping like painted waves, jewels catching fire in the music's rhythm. Couples turn and bow, hands briefly touching before parting again, their movements weaving patterns as precise as the frescoes above them. The hall itself becomes a living painting, each dancer a brushstroke of elegance and discipline. As the night wanes, the music softens, and dancers return to their seats, flushed but still composed. Laughter follows, but beneath it lies relief, the relief of having endured the trial of grace. Without falter, the noble woman adjusts her sleeves, her face serene. Though her heart beats quickly, she has danced well. She has passed another test. But the evening is not yet over. There remains the final ritual, the quietest yet most intimate act of Renaissance beauty. When the music fades, the candles gutter, and the salons empty, women return to their chambers for the unmaking of elegance. From the art of dance, we drift into the tender ritual of unlacing, where corsets are loosened, gowns fall away, and the hidden body breathes freely once more. The palace grows quiet. Music has faded into silence. The banquet long cleared away, and the torches along the corridors burn low. In the chambers of noble women, a final ritual begins less public, but no less meaningful. It is the moment of release, the slow unmaking of beauty. Attendants gather, candles flicker, and the air grows heavy with the mingled scents of perfume, sweat, and melted wax. For the women of the Renaissance, this was the hour of unlacing. Imagine the noblewoman standing before her mirror, the weight of velvet and brocade pressing down after hours of display. Her face still glows beneath a veil of powder, her hairline bare from plucked strands, her feet aching from pointed shoes. She has danced, dined, and smiled, carrying elegance as if it were effortless. But now at last she may let the facade loosen. Her maid approaches, fingers deft at the knots that bind the corset. Slowly the laces slip free. The pressure that has held her body rigid all evening begins to ease. She sighs softly as her ribs expand against air that feels new. The sound of unlacing is almost tender, a faint creak of fabric, the whisper of loosened cords. Beneath the stay's skin bears faint marks, red imprints, where bones pressed too tightly, lines etched from strain, yet relief washes over her as the garment slips away. For the first time in hours, she can breathe deeply. Her shoulders fall, her spine curves, her body returns to its natural rhythm. What the world demanded to be sculpture, she now allows to be human again. Servants peel away the heavy layers, velvet brocade embroidered silk, until the noblewoman stands in simple linen. Each discarded gown is folded carefully, yet the moment feels like shedding a performance costume by costume. Her feet are freed from narrow shoes, revealing toes cramped and tender. Sometimes blisters swell, sometimes nails are bruised. But for tonight, she simply rests them in a basin of warm water, sighing as sensation returns. Beauty demanded pain, but here in the privacy of her chamber, the pain finally eases. There is intimacy in this ritual. Attendants work quietly, careful not to break the calm. Candles burn low, shadows soften, and the noblewoman herself may whisper, laugh, or even groan softly in relief. To outsiders, she has been a vision of serenity. To herself, she is a body weary from the theater of beauty, and yet this moment of unmasking is itself beautiful. It is the hidden side of Renaissance life, the sigh after spectacle, the quiet exhale after hours of display. Pause and consider how universal this moment feels. Across time, people remove uniforms, costumes, and masks when the world no longer watches. The Egyptians set aside garlands and jugs. After their feasts, the Renaissance noblewoman sheds corsets and gowns. In both, there is a common humanity, the longing for comfort, the relief of authenticity. Beauty may demand sacrifice, but the body always demands rest. Finally, the last layer is set aside, and the noblewoman lies down upon her bed. Linen sheets cool against skin, the chamber filled with faint traces of perfume and extinguished candles. She breathes deeply, ribs expanding freely for the first time since morning, her forehead bare and high glimmers in the candle's final glow. Her eyes close. Tomorrow, the ritual will begin again, plucking, lacing, dining, dancing. But for tonight, she has slipped back into herself. And so, Chapter 2 comes to its close. From the pain of plucked brows to the weight of velvet, from the balance of towering Chopins to the delicate poise of dance Renaissance beauty, reveals itself as a discipline of endurance disguised as elegance. Women carried art upon their very bodies, suffering silently to embody ideals, painted by masters and whispered by poets. Yet beneath the performance lay resilience, quiet strength, and the private relief of release. The night falls over Florence, and silence settles in the palaces. But history moves on. Beyond Europe's gilded salons lies another world, one hidden in shadows and ink. In Edo, Japan, beauty was carved into skin itself, a gallery of myth and meaning, worn upon the body. From corsets and velvet, we drift eastward into the world of tattoos, the sacred and secret art of Irezumi. The city of Edo never truly slept. Lanterns flickered along narrow streets. Tea houses murmured with late-night laughter, and the scent of grilled fish lingered in the air. Yet beneath this bustle lay another world quieter and more secretive, the world of Irezumi. Tattoos in Edo were rarely flaunted in the open. They lived beneath plain work clothes, hidden from the gaze of authorities and polite society. To glimpse them was to enter an intimate space, often revealed only in the steamy air of a bathhouse or in fleeting moments of trust. Picture the bathhouses of Edo, wide wooden halls, filled with steam, the sound of water splashing against stone, the chatter of men soaking away the day's fatigue. It was here, when shirts were stripped away, that the hidden galleries of ink came alive. One man bent forward, his back revealing a dragon coiled in swirling clouds. Another raised his arm, blossoms of cherry and waves tumbling down his skin. These were not small designs tucked into corners of the body. They were vast sweeping murals, covering shoulders, arms, backs, even entire torsos. A single body became a canvas every inch, telling a story too bold for words. Unlike the noble finery of Renaissance salons, tattoos in Edo were marks of the outsider. Merchants, laborers, gamblers, and firemen wore them proudly. These men lived at the edges of order in professions dangerous and unpredictable. Tattoos became their armor and identity, announcing strength, endurance, and loyalty. A fireman with waves and dragons carved into his skin entered flames not only with courage, but with symbols of protection etched permanently upon him. A gambler with phoenixes on his chest carried luck and rebirth as his shield. In a society that demanded conformity, tattoos proclaimed individuality and defiance. But secrecy was essential. The Tokugawa shogunate often viewed tattoos with suspicion, linking them to criminals and outcasts. In fact, certain markings were forced upon criminals as punishment, branding them for life. Yet even within this stigma, artistry flourished. Those who chose Irezumi voluntarily reclaimed the art from shame, transforming what could have been a mark of disgrace into a badge of honor. What the authorities saw as dangerous, the tattooed saw as beautiful. It was rebellion by ink, quiet but unyielding. The hidden nature of tattoos gave them a special intimacy. To reveal one's designs was to invite someone into a private truth. Lovers traced the lines of koi and dragons across their partner's body, reading them like poems. Companions in bathhouses admired each other's art, sharing stories of meaning and endurance. The tattoos connected individuals to one another, creating invisible brotherhoods that existed outside official structures of power. To be inked was to join a family built not of blood, but of shared pain and pride. Pause and imagine the atmosphere of such a gathering. Steam rises, water splashes, and laughter echoes against wooden beams. Then, as a man stretches or leans, the surface of his back becomes a stage, revealing the snarling face of a tiger or the petals of a lotus unfolding. Gasps, admiration, or even silence follow. In that moment, the tattoo is not just decoration, but transformation. The ordinary body turned extraordinary, mythic, untouchable. There is beauty in the secrecy itself. Unlike jewels or silks, tattoos could not be stolen, sold, or inherited. They belonged wholly to the body that bore them, carried to the grave. They were gifts of permanence, in a world of impermanence, reminders that meaning could be carved into flesh as surely as into stone. And so the hidden world of Irezumi thrived in Edo's shadows, half forbidden, half sacred. It was never meant for everyone's eyes, but for those who bore it, and those privileged to glimpse it, the art was unforgettable. From this hidden stage, we drift closer to the hands that made it possible, the Horishi, the masters of the needle, who turned human skin into living scrolls of myth and devotion. In a quiet room, far from the noise of Edo's bustling markets, the Horishi sits cross-legged, his tools laid neatly before him. Unlike painters who worked with brushes, or sculptors who carved in stone, his canvas breathes and trembles. His art lives not on scrolls, but upon skin. Each line he carves with his needle is permanent, and each design carries not only beauty, but also meaning, risk, and pain. The Horishi is more than an artisan. He is part healer, part storyteller, part priest of ink. The tools of his craft were simple but demanding. Instead of machines, he used bundles of sharpened needles attached to wooden handles dipped into ink, made from soot mixed with resin. The ink was thick, black, and permanent, pressed into the skin with repeated jabs. The rhythm was steady, almost musical, tap, 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 as the design slowly emerged. Unlike modern tattoos done in hours, Irezumi often took months, sometimes years to complete. A single session might last only a few hours, the client enduring as much pain as he could bear before swelling forced the work to pause. The pigments themselves were steeped in tradition. Black soot provided the outlines, while red, blue, and green pigments were sometimes added for detail. These colors carried their own meanings: red for courage, blue for protection, green for life and renewal. But black was always the foundation, the ink of permanence, the base upon which myths were written. When the Horishi pressed his needles into the skin, he was not simply coloring flesh. He was weaving symbols that tied his client to stories older than the city itself. Becoming a Horishi required years of apprenticeship. Young students observed in silence, cleaning tools, preparing ink, and learning to copy designs on paper before ever touching skin. Only after years of patient practice would a master allow them to work on clients, first with small motifs, then larger murals. Each Horishi developed his own style, some known for sweeping dragons, others for delicate waves or blossoms. Reputation spread quietly through bathhouses and underground circles, where men whispered the names of masters whose work seemed alive, whose lines flowed like water, whose creatures seemed ready to leap from the body. The relationship between Horishi and client was intimate. To be tattooed was to endure hours of pain under another man's hand, to trust him not only with skin, but with meaning. Clients often spoke of their lives, their struggles, their hopes as they sat through the sessions, the steady rhythm of the needle like a drumbeat beneath their words. The Horishi became confidant as well as artist, turning confessions into symbols, weaving stories into ink. Pause and picture such a session. The room is dim, the air thick with incense to mask the metallic scent of blood. The client sits bare-backed, muscles taut, sweat beading on his skin. The Horishi leans close, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. Tap, tap, tap. The needle pierces ink, seeps lines take shape. Hours pass in silence, broken only by the faint hiss of breath as pain rises and falls. Then, at last, the Horishi leans back, wiping the skin, to reveal a dragon's eye or the curl of a wave. It is only a fragment of the full design, but already the body is changed, transformed into a living scroll. For the Horishi, each tattoo was more than commission, it was legacy. His art would never hang in palaces or temples. It would live beneath clothing, revealed only in moments of intimacy or pride. But that secrecy gave it power. The Horishi's designs were living myths, carried into bathhouses, into fire, into the afterlife. His work endured as long as his client endured, and sometimes longer, still skin buried, yet ink preserved beneath the earth. From the tools and mastery of the Horishi, we move now into the heart of their craft. The symbols themselves, dragons, koi phoenixes and blossoms, each image carved into flesh was a language of its own, a gallery of power and meaning, written on human skin. The body becomes a canvas, and upon it unfolds a language older than ink, older even than the city of Edo itself. Dragons coil across shoulders, koi swim up arms, phoenixes rise along spines, and blossoms drift across chests. To outsiders, these may seem like decorations. To those who bore them, they were not mere images, but prayers, promises, and power etched into skin. The dragon was perhaps the most revered, born of myth and storm. It coiled in clouds, fierce and protective. To wear a dragon upon the back was to claim strength, wisdom, and guardianship. Its scales, rendered in thousands of strokes, shimmered with both menace and grace. Men who faced danger, daily firemen, gamblers, wanderers, trusted the dragon's presence to shield them as though ink could command the skies themselves. The pain of carving it into flesh became a pact. As long as the dragon lived on their skin, courage would never abandon them. Koi fish swam through many bodies, climbing rivers, up ribs and arms. The koi was the symbol of perseverance, of struggle against current and fate. Legends told of koi that swam upstream and leapt waterfalls, transforming into dragons at the summit. For gamblers, merchants, and laborers, the koi was a mirror of their own journeys, lives of hardship endured with the hope of transformation. Each scale was tapped into the skin, hundreds of needle strikes for each detail, until the koi seemed alive, swimming forever against the current of flesh. The phoenix soared as symbol of rebirth, its wings spread across backs, its feathers shimmering in resin golds. To wear the phoenix was to claim endurance beyond suffering, to promise renewal after destruction. For men whose lives carried risk, firefighters who walked into burning buildings, gamblers who staked fortunes in moments, the phoenix was both talisman and reminder that even in ruin, one could rise again. Cherry blossoms, delicate and fleeting, often framed the grander designs. Falling petals drifted across shoulders or down arms, softening the ferocity of dragons and tigers. The blossom spoke of life's impermanence, of beauty that blooms and dies in a season. They reminded their wearers of mortality, of the fragility beneath strength. In this balance of fierce creatures and fragile flowers lay the essence of Irezumi power, tempered by humility, permanence shadowed by impermanence. Other motifs layered meaning upon meaning. Tigers prowled down spines embodying courage and ferocity. Waves surged along ribs and arms, symbols of relentless nature of life's unpredictability. Lotus flowers blossomed in unlikely places, signs of purity rising from mud. Each tattoo was not one image, but an entire story, a scroll of philosophy written on the body. Pause for a moment and picture such a man in the bathhouse. He kneels to wash water streaming down his back. The steam parts, and suddenly the room sees him anew not as flesh and bone, but as myth embodied. A dragon coils across his shoulders, koi leap along his arms. Blossoms drift like falling snow. He is no longer ordinary. He is story strength and spirit combined. Those who look upon him feel awe, perhaps even fear, for his body speaks a language without words, a script of ink that cannot be erased. And yet this beauty was not meant for galleries or courts. It was hidden most of the time, carried in silence, revealed only in trusted spaces. That secrecy made the symbols more powerful. They were not for everyone's eyes, only for those invited. And in that hidden language, men found identity, loyalty, and pride. From the images themselves, we turn now to what they created: bonds of loyalty, stronger than ink alone. For tattoos were not only personal, they were communal, binding men together in brotherhoods where loyalty was carved as deeply as the designs themselves. The streets of Edo at night were alive with whispers, gamblers, hunched over dice games in smoky inns, firemen rushing into the glow of burning houses, merchants moving coins discreetly from hand to hand. Beneath their plain robes, many of these men carried something far more permanent than coin or reputation: tattoos that bound the Essa to one another in bonds invisible to the rest of the world. Irezumi was not only art, nor even a personal talisman. It was brotherhood carved deep into skin. Among the most respected wearers of tattoos were the Hikeshi Edo's firemen. Their work was brutal, their bravery unmatched. Fires spread quickly through the city's wooden buildings, reducing whole districts to ash in hours. The Hikeshi fought not only flames, but collapsed smoke and chaos. To these men, tattoos became armor. Dragons curled across their backs. Waves surged down their arms. Deities stood guard upon their chests. The designs were not only symbols of protection, they were declarations of unity. When firemen stripped off their robes, the bathhouse revealed matching patterns of waves, dragons, or blossoms, each body marked with the same brotherhood. The tattoos whispered, "We burn together, we endure together, we live and die as one." Gamblers, too, found in tattoos their code of loyalty. The dice might betray them, the cards might fall against them, but their ink never wavered. Groups of gamblers sometimes chose shared motifs, dragons of the same style, blossoms that mirrored across arms, waves that connected when men stood side by side. To wear these tattoos was to prove commitment to the group, loyalty stronger than words. Betrayal was unthinkable, for the ink marked them as kin, even in loss or exile. The tattoos declared allegiance louder than voices ever could. In Edo's underground, where order faltered and the proto-yakuza began to rise, tattoos became both warning and bond. To outsiders, a man with a full body suit of ink seemed dangerous, untouchable. To insiders, the designs marked him as trustworthy, disciplined, willing to endure pain for the sake of the group. The hours of suffering beneath the Horishi's needle were not wasted. They were proof of devotion. To flinch was shame, but to endure was loyalty written into flesh. Pause and imagine the bathhouse after a long night of gambling or firefighting. The steam rises, robes are shed, and suddenly the room transforms. What seemed like ordinary men reveal themselves as warriors of ink, their bodies alive with dragons, koi, and blossoms. A man with nothing but plain skin might feel small among them, for tattoos were not only decoration, but declarations of strength and belonging. Each design was a thread woven into a larger tapestry, binding individuals into brotherhoods invisible beneath clothing, but undeniable in intimacy. The secrecy of tattoos deepened these bonds. Unlike banners on battlefields or uniforms in armies, Irezumi was hidden. It was revealed only among those who shared trust. This made the brotherhood even more powerful, for to show one's tattoos was to show vulnerability to open the self to another. A gambler rolling dice with sleeves pulled back revealed not just his arm, but his allegiance. A fireman bathing after a blaze showed not only his strength, but the loyalty inked into his skin. There is something haunting in this unity. Tattoos did not prevent pain, or death fires still raged. Dice still fell cruelly, but they gave men a sense of permanence in a fleeting world. Their ink said, "Even if I burn, even if I fall, my loyalty endures." In a society that often demanded obedience to distant lords and strict codes, these underground brotherhoods carved their own codes as deep and unyielding as the ink beneath their skin. As the steam fades and the brotherhood disperses, the tattoos disappear once more beneath robes, yet their power lingers unseen but never forgotten. And from these shared bonds, we turn to the heart of tattooing itself. The pain endured, for Irezumi was not only art or loyalty, it was trial by endurance, where every needle strike became both suffering and transformation. The room is dim, the paper walls shutting out the clamor of Edo's streets. A man sits bare-backed, his muscles tense, while beside him the Horishi dips his bundle of needles into soot-black ink. Then begins the rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Each stroke drives pigment into skin, each strike sharp as fire. Hours stretch long. The man's jaw tightens. His breath comes shallow. Sweat beads upon his brow. This is the trial of Irezumi pain, not as punishment, but as passage. Tattoos in Edo were not casual adornments. They demanded suffering, and suffering gave them meaning. A small flower on the arm could sting enough to leave a man trembling. A full bodysuit back chest, arms, legs could take years to finish. Sessions often ended when swelling forced the Horishi to stop, the skin raw and angry, the body exhausted. Clients returned again and again, week after week, submitting themselves to the needle until the design was complete. To endure this willingly was proof of character. Weak men quit. Strong men bore the pain and carried it proudly, their scars transformed into beauty. The endurance was physical, but also spiritual. Pain forced the body into stillness, the mind into focus. Each strike of the needle was a meditation, a reminder of impermanence, of mortality. Some compared it to the discipline of monks who sat in silent meditation for hours despite discomfort. Others likened it to trial by fire, where only those who endured emerged purified. In the steady rhythm of needle and breath suffering, was transfigured into meaning. Pause and imagine the sensation, the burn of ink pressed into raw skin, the sharp sting repeated hundreds, thousands of times. The body flinches, the muscles ache, but slowly the mind drifts. Pain becomes rhythm, rhythm becomes trance. Some spoke of visions of dragons, rising from the smoke of incense of koi, leaping from streams of ancestors, whispering courage. Perhaps these were illusions of fatigue, or perhaps in the haze of pain, the spirit glimpsed truths hidden from daily life. The scars themselves became part of the art. In places where skin healed unevenly, the ink deepened, creating shadows that gave designs a living texture. Every scar was a reminder of what had been endured, a testament written into the canvas of the body. To trace the lines of a finished tattoo was to touch not only art, but memory hours of sweat tears and endurance etched into every scale, every feather, every wave. In this way, pain became pride. Men displayed their tattoos in bathhouses not to boast of wealth, for ink was not cheap, but to show endurance. To carry a full body of ink meant hundreds of hours of suffering. To finish it without complaint was proof of loyalty, strength, and resilience. Those who bore tattoos were not only marked, they were transformed, their bodies remade as symbols of endurance itself. There is a quiet beauty in this philosophy. In Renaissance Europe, beauty demanded endurance too. Corsets laced tight shoes, raised high brows, plucked raw. But in Edo, the endurance was sharper, more literal, carried not in hidden aches, but in wounds made visible. And unlike velvet or perfume tattoos, could not be removed at day's end. The pain endured became permanent, a story written into the skin forever. The session ends at last. The horishi wipes away blood and ink, the man's skin swollen tender, alive with fire. He rises slowly, his body aching, yet his eyes shine with quiet pride. A dragon's tail curls across his back, incomplete but unmistakable. The pain has given birth to beauty, and beauty has given birth to power. He bows to the horishi, then steps into the night, carrying his suffering proudly. From here, our journey drifts into another layer of the story, the women who too embraced ink. In Edo's floating world of courtesans and fisherwomen, tattoos became not only symbols of loyalty, but acts of rebellion carved into skin where society least expected them. The floating world of Edo, the ukiyo, was alive with lantern light music, drifting from tea houses, and the laughter of courtesans echoing across narrow alleys. Here, in the pleasure quarters, beauty wore many forms. Silks embroidered with gold faces, painted white lips crimson against the night. Yet beneath the layers of fabric, some women carried another beauty, one hidden from polite society, but powerful in its intimacy, tattoos, carved into their own skin. For courtesans, tattoos often carried the language of love. Lovers' names were etched along wrists, shoulders, or thighs, proof of devotion written in ink that could not fade like whispered promises. In moments of passion, these names were revealed, a brand of loyalty that both thrilled and bound. But love is fragile, and so too were these marks. When relationships soured, women sometimes scarred or burned over the names, a visible wound layered upon the ink. Others covered them with new designs. Dragons swallowing letters, waves washing names away, transforming heartbreak into living testimony. The body became a diary, each tattoo a chapter of intimacy and loss. Beyond the courtesans, fisherwomen and wives of laborers also embraced Irezumi. Their tattoos were simpler, waves, blossoms, talismans of protection, but no less meaningful. For women who lived lives of danger or hardship, tattoos became shields against misfortune, prayers worn upon the flesh. A lotus climbing an arm promised purity amid difficulty. A wave along the wrist evoked strength to endure. For these women, tattoos were rebellion not only against beauty standards, but against vulnerability itself. In a society that valued modesty and obedience, they carved their independence into permanence. The secrecy of these tattoos heightened their power. While men revealed their ink proudly in bathhouses, women's tattoos were hidden beneath layers of kimono glimpsed only by lovers or in intimate settings. This secrecy turned them into private acts of defiance. A woman might walk the market carrying fish baskets or pour tea in a salon, and no one would know that beneath her robe blossomed a dragon or koi. The ink was hers alone, a silent rebellion carried in the most personal space, the body itself. Pause and imagine the intimacy of such a revelation. A courtesan, sitting in the glow of lamplight, slips her robe from her shoulder, revealing a delicate spray of cherry blossoms curling along her collarbone. A fisherwoman, resting after a long day, shows a hidden wave curling at her wrist. These moments were not public spectacle, but private confession glimpses of strength or devotion carved into skin. To be invited to see such tattoos was to be trusted to be allowed into a secret world. For the Horishi, tattooing women carried added weight. Each line was drawn carefully not only for beauty but for meaning. Some designs were coordinated with a lover's tattoos, shared motifs of unity and belonging. Others were chosen in silence, symbols of personal strength that no one else would ever fully understand. Pain was endured in secret, away from gossip, away from judgment. These women bore their trials quietly, their pride hidden beneath everyday duties. There is resilience here, and beauty of a different kind. Where noble women in Renaissance Europe endured corsets and plucked brows for public approval, women in Edo inked their bodies for private truths. Their tattoos were not for society's gaze, but for their own survival, their own stories, their own rebellions. In their permanence, they found freedom and escape from the fleeting roles society pressed upon them. And yet, like the men, they too found community. Courtesans bonded over shared designs. Fisherwomen compared blossoms, and wives drew strength from tattoos that echoed those of their husbands. Ink stitched them into quiet sisterhoods, hidden yet enduring. The night deepens over Edo's floating world. Lanterns fade, music dwindles, and women return to their chambers, their tattoos veiled once more. But the ink remains whispering of love, rebellion, and resilience. From here, our path turns toward the artists themselves, the Horishi, who left secret signatures within their work, pride hidden in petals and scales, waiting to be found by those who knew where to look. The Horishi dips his brush in ink and sketches quickly on thin rice paper dragons twisting through clouds, koi leaping over waterfalls, blossoms scattered by unseen winds. These are the drafts, the visions that will soon live upon human skin. Yet within every design lies something more than myth and beauty. For the tattoo masters of Edo, pride demanded permanence, but secrecy demanded discretion. And so they left their marks not boldly, but hidden tiny signatures woven into the very fabric of the art. Unlike painters whose names were inscribed in the corners of scrolls, Horishi could not sign their work openly. Tattoos were already precarious, condemned by officials, and shunned by polite society. To leave a clear name would have invited suspicion, even persecution. Instead, signatures slipped into the fields of dragons' tails, nestled in the petals of lotuses, or disguised within the foam of waves. To the untrained eye, they were simply part of the scene. To those who knew, they were quiet declarations. This is mine. My hand created this. Imagine running your eyes along a finished back piece, a great phoenix rising in a storm of blossoms. The wings shimmer with thousands of strokes. The tail feathers cascade like fire. At first, you see only the grandeur. But look closer, and in the curl of a blossom, hidden among the petals, a tiny kanji symbol rests, barely visible, almost secret. It is the Horishi's name, his signature folded into myth. Only those who were told would ever know it was there. For the tattooed, these signatures became badges of pride. To carry the mark of a famous Horishi was an honor proof that one had endured the hands of a master. Men revealed their tattoos in bathhouses, not only for the power of dragons or koi, but for the recognition of style. That is the work of Hori Chiyo, one might whisper. Those scales belonged to Horimata. Each master's hand was distinct, each stroke a language. Hidden signatures confirmed authenticity, preserving pride long after artist and client had parted. The secrecy of these marks also reflected the intimacy of the art. Tattoos were not public canvases. They were hidden scrolls, carried beneath robes shared only in trust. In the same way, the signature was not for the world, but for the wearer. It was a quiet bond between artist and client, a reminder that there stamped together hours of pain, silence, and endurance was written into the body forever. Even if the world condemned, even if the tattoo was never revealed, the bearer knew a master's hand shaped me. Pause and feel the intimacy of that knowledge. Unlike a painting hung in a hall, a tattoo could not be sold or stolen. It could not be inherited or destroyed by fire. It lived only with the body, as permanent as flesh itself. For a Horishi, to sign such a work was to invest himself in the life of the client. His art would walk the streets, fight fires, gamble fortunes, and one day be buried beneath the earth. His legacy was not preserved in scrolls, but in living, breathing people. There is poetry in this hidden pride. In a society where tattoos were condemned, Horishi found ways to affirm their artistry without defiance. They signed not with bold strokes, but with whispers, not with banners, but with petals and scales. Their marks were invisible to the authorities, yet eternal to those who carried them. And so across Edo, countless men and women bore not only dragons and koi, but the secret marks of artists who refused anonymity. Beneath the myths, beneath the symbols, pulsed the quiet pride of the Horishi, etched forever into skin. But the world was changing. As Japan moved toward modernity, the secrecy that had protected Irezumi was threatened. The Meiji era dawned with new laws, new shame, and new persecution. From hidden signatures, we drift now into the shadows of survival when tattoos were outlawed, yet endured in silence, coiled like dragons waiting for release. The Edo night fades into dawn, and with it centuries of tradition begin to shift. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration swept across Japan, ushering in a new age of modernization. The old ways' lantern-lit streets, shogunate law's hidden brotherhoods, were pressed beneath the weight of a new desire to appear civilized in the eyes of the West. And in this new vision of modern Japan, Irezumi had no place. Tattoos, once badges of loyalty and identity, were branded as barbaric. The government declared them illegal. Imagine the fear this brought to Horeshi and their clients. For generations, tattoos had been a private rebellion, tolerated in secrecy, though condemned in law. Now, the crackdown was merciless. Police patrolled bathhouses, searching for men whose backs bore dragons and koi. Shops where ink had been mixed in quiet corners were shuttered. Clients risked arrest for showing their tattoos, and artists faced punishment for continuing their craft. What had once been hidden pride was now forced further underground, whispered of only in shadows. Yet myth has a way of surviving persecution. Dragons do not vanish when told to, and koi do not cease their struggle against the current. So too did Irezumi endure. Horishi adapted working at back rooms and hidden chambers. Their needles struck more quietly. Their clients wrapped robes tightly to hide their ink. Some designs grew even more secretive, sprawling across bodies, but leaving the chest bare so that a robe slipping open in public would reveal nothing. The art retreated, but it did not die, for the tattooed persecution added new layers of meaning to where ink now was not only to declare loyalty or strength, it was to accept stigma, to stand apart from society. Tattoos became associated with the underworld, with gamblers, with those who refused obedience. The stigma of criminality grew, and with it fear, yet within circles of firemen, laborers, and underground groups, tattoos remained marks of pride. The more society tried to erase them, the more fiercely they clung to their meaning. Pause and picture a man in the Meiji era walking through a crowded street. His robe is drawn high sleeves, hiding koi that swim up his arms. Only in the bathhouse, only in the trusted circle of companions does he let the fabric slip and reveal the dragon across his back. In that moment, he carries not only art, but defiance. His tattoo is both burden and shield proof that he refuses to let go of his identity even when the world demands it. The persecution gave Irezumi its paradoxical nature, condemned in public, revered in private, stigmatized by the state, sanctified by those who bore it. This duality shaped its destiny, for while noble women in Europe left portraits of velvet and lace, and pharaohs left tombs filled with incense and wine, the tattooed of Edo left living legacies written in ink that endured long after laws tried to silence them. And still the myths carved into skin whispered of resilience. Dragons promised strength, koi perseverance, phoenixes rebirth. These stories lived even when society shamed them, reminding the wearers that they carried not disgrace, but timeless power. Pain had transformed into permanence, and permanence into pride. As the Meiji era tightened its grip, tattoos did not vanish. They coiled into the shadows like dragons, waiting beneath clouds. They lived in the bathhouses, in the back rooms of Horishi, in the whispered bonds of brotherhoods, and even when outlawed, they remained a truth too deeply inked to erase. So, Chapter 3 closes here in secrecy, stigma, and resilience. From hidden bathhouses to the needles of Horishi, from the loyalty of brotherhoods to the rebellion of women, Irezumi emerges not as shame, but as testament. It is pain turned to power, secrecy turned to story, persecution turned to permanence. The lanterns of Edo dim, the robes fall closed, and the tattoos retreat into silence. But history does not end. Beyond Japan's shadows, we drift westward once more into Renaissance Europe's forbidden libraries, where beauty and danger were bound in ink of another kind, not upon skin, but upon the page. The flicker of candlelight falls across a monk's desk. His quill scratches steadily, filling a parchment with neat Latin lines. At first glance, the manuscript looks no different from others' columns of script, small illustrations, headings marked with careful red ink. But the subject is not theology or astronomy. It is marriage, and hidden within its solemn tone lies something far more delicate, the sanctioned way for men and women to share a bed. In Renaissance Europe, open discussion of love and sex was taboo. The church allowed it only under the seal of marriage, and even then it sought to control the language. Thus were born the marriage manuals, texts written by theologians, priests, and scholars, often celibate themselves, who claimed the authority to instruct husbands and wives on their most intimate duties. These books were not playful or romantic. They were heavy with moral weight, prescribing when, how, and even why couples might come together. Imagine a young couple on their wedding night. The room is dim, the air scented faintly with lavender from the bridal garland. The husband, nervous, recalls what he has been told, that marital union is not for pleasure, but for procreation, that indulgence in passion is sin, that certain days of the calendar are forbidden for intimacy. The wife, equally uncertain, has perhaps heard whispered advice from older women, but little else. Between them lies a gulf of silence, bridged only by the words of manuals written far away by monks who had never shared such nights themselves. The instructions were often clinical. They warned against excessive desire, against laughter or play, against anything that might turn duty into delight. Intercourse was permitted, but only with solemn intention, and certainly not on holy days. Women were often urged to submit quietly, their role framed as obedience rather than participation. Men were cautioned to temper their urges, for even within marriage, lust was dangerous. These texts transform the most human of experiences into a field of guilt calculation and restraint. Yet for all their severity, marriage manuals reveal something remarkable. They testify to an unspoken need. People wanted guidance. They wanted to understand the mysteries of intimacy, even if the answers were wrapped in warnings. The very existence of these books proves that love and desire pressed at the edges of silence, demanding to be addressed. Pause and imagine the irony. While painters like Botticelli celebrated the nude form in flowing lines, while sculptors carved marble bodies full of vitality and grace, these manuals reduced flesh to obligation. In one part of Renaissance sculpture, beauty and desire were assaulted. In another, they were smothered under rules. A couple might stand in church, surrounded by frescoes of Adam and Eve, their bodies depicted with luminous sensuality, then return home to a bed where passion was constrained by the words of a manual. The contradiction was sharp, and yet it was the very tension that kept forbidden texts alive, because of course not everyone obeyed. For every young couple who followed the rules, another turned to whispered poems, secret letters, or even hidden books that spoke more freely of love. The marriage manuals became unintentionally the gateway into a greater hunger. By trying to control desire, they revealed how much people longed to understand it. The manuals endured copied and read, but they were only the beginning, for soon other books would appear, scientific treatises and anatomical illustrations, works that claimed to teach the body, but could not help but stir curiosity of another kind. And so, from the rigid instructions of monks and priests, we drift into the next chapter of forbidden knowledge, where science and desire intertwined upon the pages of anatomy. The chamber smells faintly of wax and ink. A student bends over a book, his eyes wet as he traces the lines of a woodcut engraving. Muscles ripple across the page, bones align in delicate lattices, veins branch like rivers. The Renaissance was the age of anatomy, when dissections once forbidden by the church became tools of knowledge. Bodies, once cloaked in mystery, were studied with the precision of geometry. But within this pursuit of science lurked another forced desire, for these books meant to enlighten could not help but awaken curiosity of a different kind. Andreas Vesalius's De Humani Corporis Fabrica, printed in 1543, was a masterpiece of anatomy. Its illustrations were breathtaking skeletons, posed like philosophers in landscapes, musclemen standing with heads tilted in thought, bodies peeled back, layer by layer, revealing the machinery of life. Officially, it was a scientific triumph. Yet for many readers, the very act of gazing so intently at flesh carried undertones of fascination that bordered on the sensual. To see the body undressed by ink was to see it revealed in ways art had long suggested, but text had rarely permitted. Imagine the sensation of turning a page and encountering a female figure, muscles exposed, but curves still evident, her stance poised like a dancer. A student might tell himself he was studying science, that every line of ink was pure knowledge. Yet the eye lingered, drawn not only to muscle and bone, but to the quiet echo of beauty beneath. For centuries, desire had been hidden beneath sermons and guilt. Now it found a loophole in science. If the church frowned on love poetry, could it truly condemn anatomy? Of course, suspicion grew quickly. Authorities worried that these books, though wrapped in medical authority, were too alluring. The engravings were detailed, sometimes too detailed. Whispered jokes circulated in universities about students who borrowed anatomy texts not for study, but for private fascination. Artists, too, treasured these books, copying the figures for their own sketches, blending science with aesthetics. Knowledge and temptation became entangled, each page a careful dance between enlightenment and longing. Pause and consider the paradox. The Renaissance celebrated the rediscovery of the body, painted in frescoes, carved in marble, exalted in anatomy. Yet this celebration risked inflaming the very passions the church tried so hard to suppress. In a fresco of Venus, beauty was divine. In an anatomy book, it was scientific. But to a reader in candlelight, both might stir the same quiet fire. The line between study and desire blurred as thin as the vellum pages themselves. For women, the stakes were even higher. A noblewoman who glimpsed such a book in her family's library might pretend to admire the science, while secretly learning about her own form in ways society never taught. A nun educated in a convent might copy diagrams under the guise of scholarship, yet find herself drawn to the mysterious elegance of the body revealed. In silence, these books gave women knowledge, denied them elsewhere knowledge that was powerful, dangerous, and deeply human. The illustrations themselves carried coded beauty. Bodies were not slumped or grotesque, as in real dissections. They stood gracefully posed, like statues, their gestures refined. Even stripped of skin, they resembled dancers, philosophers, or saints. It was as if the artists could not resist blending truth with artistry, ensuring that even in death, the human form was beautiful. And so anatomy became a doorway. It was science, yes, but also a secret path toward desire, curiosity, and self-discovery. Every page whispered two truths at once. This is the body's structure, and this is the body's allure. The tension could not be undone. From the quiet libraries where anatomy stirred both awe and longing, we drift now to the playbooks of love themselves, no longer disguised as science. These texts taught directly how to woo, how to write, how to play the dangerous game of seduction. The flicker of firelight spills across a small salon in Florence. Gentle laughter rises among the rustle of silk, and in one corner a young nobleman leans close to a lady slipping a folded paper into her hand. She lowers her gaze, concealing a smile, and later, in the quiet of her chamber, she unfolds it. Inside are not prayers or scripture, but words of careful flattery phrases crafted from a hidden guide the love playbooks of the Renaissance. Unlike the stern marriage manuals or the solemn anatomy texts, these books disguise themselves as etiquette. On the surface, they taught the art of writing letters, of polite conversation, of courtly manners. But between the lines, their true purpose shimmered. They were handbooks of seduction manuals for the dance of flirtation, guides to winning hearts in societies where passion was both expected and forbidden. Imagine a page instructing how to begin a letter with modesty, how to slip compliments without overstepping, how to feign indifference when burning with desire. These instructions turned love into a game with rules as intricate as chess. A misplaced word could ruin reputation, but a perfect phrase might ignite a hidden fire. In an age where marriages were often arranged, love itself became an art practiced in whispers and letters. The playbooks were maps to this hidden world. Some were openly inspired by classical sources. Cicero's rhetoric shaped compliments. Ovid's wit colored strategies of pursuit. Others hid beneath the guise of education, teaching Latin phrases and poetic flourishes that doubled as love notes. They circulated among the curious, copied, quietly sometimes annotated with personal additions, a name, a detail, a secret code meant for a single pair of eyes. Pause and imagine the thrill of using such a guide. A young man studies the pages by candlelight, rehearsing lines in the mirror before daring to speak them at a gathering. A young woman, equally curious, reads her own copy, learning how to interpret glances, how to test sincerity with subtle questions. Both are players in a drama written centuries before their scripts, supplied by books too dangerous to be acknowledged openly, yet too alluring to resist. These manuals reveal much about Renaissance society. On one hand, love was bound tightly by duty-arranged marriages and church law. On the other, the heart strained against those bonds, longing for choice, for flirtation, for intimacy freely given. The playbooks did not promise rebellion outright. Instead, they offered strategies for bending within the rules, for finding space to breathe desire in a world that demanded restraint. The letters crafted with their help often became treasures, folded into silk sleeves, hidden in prayer books, slipped into gloves, they carried the weight of more than ink. They were confessions daring risks, disguised as politeness. To receive one was to feel the pulse of something forbidden. To answer was to join the game. In these exchanges, love lived not in open declarations, but in hidden sentences, coded glances, and lines rehearsed from books. And yet danger always lurked. A letter intercepted could lead to disgrace. A phrase too bold might ignite gossip. To play the game was to court risk. But perhaps that was the very point. Desire sharpened beneath the edge of danger, and the playbooks fed that tension, teaching not only how to woo, but how to conceal. There is poetry in this secrecy, where pharaohs carried wine and incense to their tombs, and Horishi carved dragons into skin. Renaissance lovers inscribed passion into paper, fragile, flammable, easily lost, yet powerful enough to shift lives. From these playful manuals, we drift toward the ancient voice that whispered, even louder than the Renaissance playbooks. Across centuries, Ovid's Ars Amatoria, the art of love, returned from Rome to tempt new readers, offering not etiquette, but outright seduction. The candle burns low, its light trembling across the curve of a page. The Latin words gleam like secrets, their rhythm lilting, playful, alive. This is not theology nor sober philosophy. It is Ovid's Ars Amatoria, the art of love. A Roman text written centuries before, but reborn in the Renaissance like a spark hidden in ashes. For those who read it, Ovid was not merely a poet. He was a conspirator. A voice whispering across time is how to love, how to seduce, how to make desire into art. In its verses, Ovid taught the steps of pursuit, as though love were a carefully staged performance. He advised where to meet potential lovers, the theater, the races, the banquets. He taught how to flatter without flattery, how to feign jealousy to sharpen affection, how to promise enough, but never too much. His lines were witty, daring, and scandalously practical for young men and women hemmed in by church and custom. These words were intoxicating. They were not vague hints wrapped in etiquette. They were instructions, bold and unapologetic. Imagine a scholar in Florence smuggling a copy beneath his cloak, his heart racing as he returns home to read by candlelight. The lines make him laugh, blush, and dream all at once. Here is knowledge his tutors never offered knowledge more thrilling than Aristotle's logic or Aquinas' theology. To read Ovid is to step into a world where desire is not shameful, but clever, playful, almost divine. The danger only heightened the allure. The church despised Ovid's verses, condemning them as immoral, corrupting, even poisonous. Copies were banned, burned, or locked away, yet they survived in hidden libraries, passed quietly among humanists who loved both antiquity and risk. Every word carried the weight of danger. To read Ovid was not only to learn of love, but to rebel, to assert that desire itself was worth celebrating. Pause and feel the irony. This was the same Renaissance that painted Madonnas in radiant colors, that sculpted saints in marble, that filled churches with hymns of purity. Yet in its shadows, men and women chuckled over Ovid's lines, whispered them into each other's ears, and folded them into secret letters. The sacred and the scandalous lived side by side, each fueling the other. Ovid's verses also influenced art. Painters and engravers drew upon his myths, the loves of God and mortals, the transformations of nymphs, the passions that led to tragedy. Beneath the brushstrokes of myth lingered the playful spirit of Ovid's teachings. Desire seeped into canvases and manuscripts alike hiding in plain sight, immortalized as both story and lesson. For women especially, the Ars Amatoria could be a revelation. While the church preached obedience and silence, Ovid suggested agency, how to attract, how to test, how to wield charm as power. In convents and noble households, whispered copies circulated their lines, teaching not submission, but participation. Whether read aloud in laughter or memorized in secret, these verses gave women a script that society denied them. The survival of Ovid's work across centuries is itself a story of resilience. Empires fell, libraries burned, laws forbade. Yet still the Ars Amatoria lived, copied at by hands that refused to let desire be forgotten. Each new reader became part of that chain, keeping alive the simple, scandalous truth that love is art, and art is worth the risk. And so, within candlelit chambers of Renaissance Europe, Ovid's forbidden voice mingled with the sighs of hidden readers. His laughter echoed through centuries of silence, his verses a rebellion disguised as poetry. From Ovid's daring lessons, we drift now into the darker stage of censorship itself, the index of forbidden books, where the church struck back, compiling lists of works too dangerous for the faithful to read, and where every banned word only grew sweeter to those who sought it. The year is 1559. In Rome, under the authority of Pope Paul IV, scribes bend over desks, compiling a list that will echo through centuries. Their quills scratch steadily, name after name, title after title, works condemned as dangerous, corrupting, heretical. This is the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the index of forbidden books. Bound in leather, stamped with authority, it becomes both a weapon and a temptation, a catalogue of what must not be read, and therefore what everyone secretly longs to read. Imagine the chill of seeing a familiar title on the list: Ovid's Ars Amatoria, condemned; Boccaccio's Decameron, forbidden; Erasmus Luther astrology manuals, poetry collections, even certain anatomy texts banished from shelves. To own one was sin, to copy one crime. And yet every prohibition only fanned curiosity. What could be so dangerous in these pages that the church itself feared them? Readers whispered the titles, as if invoking spells, their very names, charged with forbidden power. The index was meant to protect the faithful, to guard minds from corruption, but in practice, it created a map for desire. A young scholar leafing through the index might treat it as a reading list rather than a warning. The banned books became treasures to seek their scarcity, giving them allure. In Florence, Venice, Paris, and beyond, clandestine copies circulated hidden in false bindings, smuggled beneath robes, tucked between pages of prayer books. The very act of reading became an adventure, each candlelit night a brush with danger. Pause and imagine the atmosphere. A scholar in his study, shutters drawn, heart pounding, as he opens a book wrapped in plain leather. Inside, the words of a banned poet spill across the page, playful daring alive. He knows discovery could bring ruin, yet the thrill is irresistible. Each sentence becomes sharper, each phrase more intoxicating, precisely because it is forbidden. The silence of the room is heavy, yet within that silence burns rebellion. For women, the index was a double barrier. Not only were books forbidden, often reading itself was discouraged beyond devotional texts, and yet in convents and noble houses, women found ways. A sympathetic tutor might slip a volume into a student's satchel. A nun might copy passages into the margins of a prayer book. These acts of quiet defiance gave women access to voices the church tried to silence, voices that spoke of love, freedom, desire, and agency. The forbidden books became lifelines, sparks of autonomy in a world that sought to enclose them. There is irony in abundance here. The Renaissance celebrated knowledge printing presses, multiplied texts, scholars debated openly, artists drew from classical sources, yet at the same time, the Church's index sought to bind knowledge in chains. The tension between repression and curiosity gave rise to a secret world of readers who lived between obedience and temptation. The more titles were banned, the more eagerly they were sought. The index itself became a paradoxical symbol. It was meant to silence, yet it preserved the names of forbidden works, ensuring they were never forgotten. Had it not existed, perhaps some titles would have faded into obscurity. Instead, the index immortalized them, each ban a backhanded tribute to their power. From these lists of silenced voices, we move into the cloistered walls, where many such books still found refuge, the convents. Behind locked gates, women lived lives of prayer and discipline, but also of education and longing. In their secret libraries, forbidden texts mingled with psalms, and desire whispered, even in places meant to silence it. The convent bells toll their echoes, drifting across tiled roofs and quiet cloisters. Inside the walls, women kneel in prayer, their voices weaving into hymns that rise toward painted ceilings. To the outside world, this is a place of silence, purity, and discipline. Yet within the thick stone walls, another reality quietly unfolds, a world of books learning and secret longing. For in the Renaissance, convents became unlikely sanctuaries of knowledge and sometimes of forbidden desire. Many women did not choose the convent life. Daughters too costly to marry off or too outspoken for noble society were sent to cloisters by family decision. Some embraced the path with devotion. Others found themselves restless, confined, yearning for lives they would never live. Education softened the isolation. Convent schools taught reading, writing, music, and scripture. Libraries filled with saints' lives theology and devotional poetry provided hours of study. Yet among the shelves, other books sometimes slipped in works less holy, more curious, and infinitely more dangerous. Imagine a novice carrying an armful of volumes to the library table. She selects a commentary on the Psalms, opens it dutifully, but tucked between its pages is a smaller book poetry copied by another sister, or perhaps a fragment of Ovid disguised within devotional binding. She reads in silence, heart-racing eyes, scanning lines that speak of love not divine, but human, of desire not sanctioned by ritual, but by passion. The library becomes less a cloister of obedience and more a doorway into another world. Some convents, especially in Italy, housed surprisingly vast collections. Nuns were often well educated. Their scholarship respected their writings, circulated beyond cloister walls. Yet with literacy came curiosity. And curiosity often led to texts outside official approval. A saint's biography might sit beside a medical manual. A book of herbal remedies might contain recipes for charms and aphrodisiacs. A psalter might hide annotations of longing scribbled by an unseen hand. To read was both pious duty and quiet rebellion. Pause and feel the strangeness of it. Women locked away from society, finding in books the very freedoms denied them outside. Through pages, they traveled to ancient Rome, to mythic loves, to imagined romances. They encountered voices that spoke of pleasure agency and choice. Some wrote their own verses, cloaking them as devotions, yet threading in metaphors of love that went far beyond piety. These words, copied and passed in secret, became lifelines of imagination in lives otherwise tightly controlled. Convent libraries also became hubs of circulation. Books banned outside sometimes found shelter within. Wealthy patrons donated volumes, some of which contained more than was expected. Printers and scribes, sympathetic to curiosity, provided disguised copies. A sister might lend a book to another, pages worn from careful turning margins, filled with hidden notes. In this quiet network, forbidden texts lived on, sustained by women who the world assumed silent. The paradox is sharp. To society, these women were voiceless, cloistered obedient. Yet within the library, they became readers, writers, thinkers, participants in the same currents of desire and knowledge that swept across Renaissance Europe. Their silence in public only deepened the intimacy of their private rebellions. And so the convent became not only a house of prayer, but a house of words. Within its walls, women found ways to explore what was denied them: knowledge, imagination, even longing. The shelves whispered of both salvation and seduction, and the line between them blurred in candlelight. From these cloistered sanctuaries, we drift into the next layers of forbidden knowledge, not poetry or anatomy, but the magic of charms and spells. For beyond books of saints and scholars lay herb manuals and grimoires, where desire took shape, not only in words, but in potions and rituals whispered as love spells. The night air in Renaissance Italy is heavy with the scent of herbs, rosemary drying by the hearth, lavender steeping in bowls, and sprigs of basil hung in doorways as protection. In cottages, in back rooms of apothecaries, and even in the margins of convent libraries, another kind of knowledge flourished. These were the charm books, the little hand-copied grimoires of remedies, rituals, and whispered enchantments, and among them none were so sought after or so feared as love spells. Love in the Renaissance was both exalted and forbidden. The Church framed it as duty marriage, as sacrament desire, as sin. Yet people longed, suffered, and hoped just as they always had. Where sermons offered restraint, charms offered possibility. Small handwritten manuals circulated quietly, collections of prayers, invocations, and recipes that blended folk magic with Christian symbols. They instructed how to win affection, how to stir passion, how to bind loyalty. To read one was to step into a world where longing itself was treated as a kind of alchemy. Imagine a page, its ink faded, its script hurried. To win the heart of one you desire, grind rose petals with honey, speak their name thrice by candlelight, and slip the mixture beneath their pillow. Another reads, write your beloved's name on parchment, with wine fold it with basil leaves and burn it so their thoughts turn to you. These spells were simple, but they carried enormous weight, for to the heartbroken, they were promises of hope. Women, especially, were drawn to such texts. Limited in agency, denied choice in marriage, they turned to charms as ways of asserting power where society denied it. A young woman forced into a union might use herbs and whispered invocations to soften her husband's anger or redirect his affection. A courtesan might use spells to bind a lover's loyalty, fearing abandonment. In a world where devotion was fickle, even nuns in cloistered secrecy sometimes copied such recipes, half in jest, half in yearning. The line between prayer and spell blurred easily when desire pressed against silence. Pause and consider the danger. To possess such a book was risky. To be accused of using it perilous. Love spells, however small, were linked in the church's mind to witchcraft, and witchcraft was a crime punished with severity. A woman with a pouch of herbs, a man with a scrap of parchment might suddenly find themselves accused of dealings with the devil. Yet for all the fear, the books endured. Desire proved stronger than prohibition, and longing found its way into ink as surely as theology did. These texts were not only spells, but records of human hope. Between their recipes and charms lay centuries of whispered questions. Will they love me? Will they return to me? Will I be alone? In their own way, they were as revealing of the human heart as any sonnet or fresco. Where poets immortalized passion in elegant lines, charm books captured it, raw, urgent, unrefined. There is a tenderness in imagining someone hunched over parchment, candle guttering low carefully, writing a spell, as though the very act of inscription might bring their longing closer. Whether or not the spell worked mattered less than the belief itself. The ritual gave form to desire, allowed people to act when they otherwise felt powerless, and in that act, they found comfort, even courage. From these small books of spells and whispered recipes, we turn now to the most daring of all Renaissance texts, not charms, copied in secrecy, but engravings and illustrations so explicit, so shocking, that they shook society to its core. For in hidden workshops, artists carved passion into copper plates, creating images of love and lust that words alone could not contain. In a dim Venetian workshop, the smell of ink and copper fills the air. By candlelight, an engraver leans over a polished plate, his burr cutting fine lines into the metal surface. With each stroke, figures emerge, lovers, entwined bodies, posed not as allegories or saints, but as men and women caught in the raw intimacy of passion. These were the secret engravings of the Renaissance images, known collectively in whisper as I modi, the positions, created by Giulio Romano and engraved by Marcantonio Raimondi around 1524. I modi was unlike anything Europe had seen before. 16 explicit scenes, detailed and unapologetic, depicted couples in poses drawn not from scripture, but from the imagination of desire itself. For some, it was scandalous beyond words. For others, it was irresistible. The church condemned the work, seizing and destroying copies, yet its fame only grew. Copies survived in fragments, whispered about in salons, hidden in cabinets, treasured by those bold enough to keep them. Imagine encountering such a book in candlelight. You turn the page and find a couple carved in precise lines, every curve, every gesture rendered with artistic mastery. The figures are not grotesque or crude. They are elegant, modeled with the same skill that adorned the walls of chapels and palaces. It was this paradox that unsettled authorities. Most the very techniques used to glorify saints and Madonnas were here turned toward the celebration of lust. For readers and viewers, the images were more than titillation. They were a revelation. In a world where desire was spoken of in hushed tones, here it was laid bare, framed in artistry that gave it legitimacy. The engravings taught, shocked, amused, and aroused all at once. Paired with sonnets by the poet Pietro Aretino, they became both manual and performance, blending instruction with scandal. Pause and feel the intensity of such a discovery. A nobleman unfolds the pages, his pulse quickening. A young artist studies the engravings, marveling at their composition, even as his cheeks flush. A woman in secret gazes at the figures, finding in them a validation of her own unspoken thoughts. The images crossed boundaries of gender and class, speaking in a universal language of longing. The danger, of course, was ever present. To be caught with such a book invited disgrace, punishment, or worse. Yet the very act of viewing became a defiance, a private rebellion against silence. I Modi and similar works circulated in shadows, copied and recopied, their survival itself a testament to the hunger they fed. These engravings reveal the Renaissance at its most contradictory. The same society that outlawed Ovid, censored poetry, and chained books in libraries also produced some of the most daring sensual art of its age. Painters and sculptors immortalized mythological nudes under the guise of allegory, while engravers went further, stripping away allegory entirely. Desire, long suppressed, demanded its own gallery. For women, the engravings held a strange power. Though men dominated their creation and circulation, women who glimpsed them found affirmation proof that their bodies were not only vessels of duty, but of pleasure. Courtesans may have used them as reference noblewomen, as secret indulgence nuns, as whispered temptation. Each viewer brought their own story, and the engravings became mirrors as much as manuals. And so in the hidden drawers of Renaissance homes, in the cabinets of collectors, and in the secret libraries of convents, these erotic works lived on. Their lines were not erased by censorship, but sharpened by it, their allure magnified by danger. They remind us that even in the most gilded and pious of ages, desire carved its place with ink and fire. With this, chapter 4 closes. From the stern marriage manuals to the playful love playbooks, from Ovid's forbidden verses to the index from convent whispers to spells and engravings, Renaissance Europe reveals itself as a world torn between silence and longing. Love and lust lived in shadows, but they lived nonetheless, immortalized in words and images too powerful to be destroyed. Beyond these hidden libraries, another world awaits, one not of parchment or engravings, but of flesh transformed into canvas. From Europe's whispers, we drift east once more into Japan's Edo nights, where tattoos already marked rebellion. Yet history moves forward toward new modernities, new battles, and new silences waiting to be broken.